I think we are live now, so we could start. So welcome back, everybody, for our evening session. And our evening session will be in the format of mixed review. So we will be summing up this 2 days of the presentations and giving short bits of different courses that you saw in the previous days. So we will start from diploma project by Robert Prattner. Then we will go to the pre-diploma projects, which will continue with the presentations of prototyping seminar, Design Studio 2, Discourse on Landscape seminar, and Landscape and Ecology seminar. So you will see the work from the different courses from both bachelor and master students, from both seminar, diploma, and design studios. So it would give us a chance to see overall agenda of the Synthetic Landscape Lab and open up a discussion. I'm very happy to introduce you the faculty of Synthetic Landscape Lab, head of the Synthetic Landscape Lab and the Institute of Urban Design, Professor Claudia Paschero, Dr. Marco Paletta, who is a part of the faculty of all the years at the Synthetic Landscape Lab. Hello, Marco. We have Teresa Greskova, who is running the prototyping course this semester, as well as many other seminars in other semester. We have Carminian Enzinger, who was running 2 courses this semester, the Design Studio 2 and the Landscape and Ecology seminar together with Marco and myself. And we also have great assistants in the Synthetic Landscape Lab, Claudia, Joy, Thole, and Emiliano, who are also here around and also helping us with prototyping, teaching, and research, and we also need to mention them. And today we have a beautiful list of guests, and I'm very happy to welcome Melissa Sterry, Dr. Melissa Sterry, very like the most inspiring lady in biodesign, transdisciplinary design scientist, theorist, biofuturist, authors, and I think that there could be a lot of affiliations, and she is a director and founder of Bionic City, and yeah, bringing a lot of new inspirational thoughts always in our creeds. Thank you, Melissa, very much for joining us. We have Dr. Gustavo Alfonso Ricon, and thank you, Gustavo, for joining us. He's a new media architecture artist, designer, research practitioner, scholar. He's a part of Digital Futures team, which is bringing a lot of inclusive, free, and the most advanced education worldwide. He is the part of many institutions that I will afraid to list, because I know that there is a lot of initiatives as well as architectural and design practice that Gustavo is introducing. Thank you very much, Gustavo, for joining today. I think if everything will go well and both Neil Leach and Daniel Kirchler would have a chance to join us a bit later, but I would need to introduce maybe them now. Professor Neil Leach promised to join us a bit later, and I don't think that he needs an introduction, but just say that he is one of the also very inspiring architects and a theorist, and a visiting professor and the faculty at the list of the best schools of architecture at Tongji University, Harvard University, Southern California University, and many others, as well as the founder of the Digital Futures initiative. And Daniel Kirchler, he's the ex faculty at the University of Innsbruck and at the Institute of Urban Design, and currently he's the assistant professor at the Architecture University of Texas, and previously has been also a faculty at the UCL Bartlett. And I also hope that Daniel would join us in a bit. So I think we are good with the introduction for now. And I'm happy to invite our first presenter is our diploma students, supervised by Professor Claudia Paschero and co-supervised by myself. Robert, yes, the stage is yours. You can start the presentation. Looking forward.
Yes, hello to all from my side. I'm glad that I can present my thesis today. The project is called La Rêverie, and I will just start sharing my screen so you can have a look. All right. So the project is about architectural environments and how they can be manipulated by human perception with a digital morphology. I will start off with a quote by Andy Clark, who's a professor for cognitive philosophy. In some cases, interfering with someone's environment will have the same moral significance as interfering with their person. I will start the presentation with the research chapter about cognition and spatial design to show the thoughts behind the process. Second, I will present my setup for the design loop. Third, the live design tool that visualizes. And last, I will evaluate the visualized personal spaces. First chapter, cognition and spatial perception. To observe your mind in automatic mode, glance at the image below. This is a picture taken from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It reveals to the reader that you subconsciously react to the image. If you want or not, it will affect you. Because it is only visual stimuli, I became curious about it from a design perspective. I found a whole lot more of those so-called cognitive biases, well described, but mostly triggered by language. Instead of checking if somebody is listening, like Kahneman does, my first intention was to take track of where someone is glancing. Therefore, I started to track eye movements to get the points I want to interfere with. My first custom-built one had only the ability of tracking two-dimensional X and Y coordinates, so I aimed to use the tracker from Pupil Labs that also measures the depth and delivers a 3D representation of the gaze. This works as following. The position of both eyes from the participant is measured. At the intersection of the direction they are looking, the gaze point is calculated, here point 1. These points get recorded, and every second, the current gaze point gets recalculated. Now, think of a conversation with someone. You can flip through the conversation and repeat what was said when. You know where emphasis was put on and what was not that important. The eye tracking method does the same. It remembers the gaze points in order of time and records the duration, how long a spot was occupied. As you have a protocol of a conversation in your head, the space gets now equipped with a spatial protocol of a fixation pattern. Imagine this relation with the room, that it remembers how much time you spent looking at a specific part of it and may leave out other parts completely. That is where the eye movements come in. They organize the whole spatial structure of the digital morphology. The so-called fixation points, where the eyes rest, are measured. This is shown by the image to the left. They get also recorded in a fixation map, a protocol, as you can see to the right. These points are used as starting points for a vector field as the person obviously interferes with them. And this will form the base for my design proposal. If a fixation occurs, a field line will be placed at this position. The start of the field line is the fixation point and flows along the surface of the guide geometry, which is the environment we are located in. A more intense fixation will affect the length of the field line. To the right, there's an example of a long fixation with 21 seconds, a medium one with 12 seconds, and a shorter one with 7 seconds. Repeating this for every gaze point will leave us a complex network of field lines. But there's the question, do we really see our environment as that important that we could say we have a relation with it? So with this question and also the need for more background of a spatial discourse, I turned to Andy Clark and mainly the extended mind. In Clark's theory, it is possible to change one's beliefs through changes in the environment. He compares it to an Alzheimer's patient that looks up his notes. Reading them will change his personal state and trigger his actions. For Clark, the notebook and our environment are somehow similar, so that the environment also changes the personal state and triggers actions. Because I already have track of a person's gaze and know with what part of the environment the person interferes, I now need to keep track of the reaction. Therefore, I work with a galvanic skin response sensor and a heart rate sensor. Both are meaningful ways that are able to measure the arousal of a person. That's because they're part of the sympathicus and do not underlie our conscious control. To the left, you can see a picture of the sensors. They are lightweight and wearable, and with full range of motion for the person. The galvanic skin response measures the conductivity of the skin in Siemens. It basically tells how much the person sweats, but with an accuracy that even tiny changes are recorded. The heart rate is measured in beats per minute, something very familiar, and also delivers information about the arousal state of the person. Remember when I said you can put emphasis on certain aspects in a conversation? At the moment, the spatial representation, in my approach, only increases in length. But saying something repetitively is not always an adequate way to put emphasis on. So I will introduce forces. If a sequence in the environment is arousive, even if it's sharp and short, it will change the behavior of the field line. The input of the force is taken by the sensors. A basic force is set according to the average arousal level of the person. This can locally be changed as shown to the right. The same field line can act different as the galvanic skin response measures the arousal level and influences the field line. With higher arousal, the field line increases the velocity factor. If we take a look to the GSR plot to the left, we can discover a sharp drop at the red dot. This represents a change in arousal and increases by its amount the local velocity by 200%. In the next case, a sharp increase occurs, and this will also increase the velocity. Because it is less strong, it will increase only by 110%. With no significant changes in the signal, the velocity remains at the average speed. Another parameter that influences the base structure is the heart rate. It has an effect on how strength and radius of the advection. With higher heart rate, these values increase and as shown to the right. In the plot, at the red dot, there is a value high above average that increases the advection by 160%. The next heart rate with 95 beats per minute will increase the advection by 120%. And a lower heart rate can even decrease the advection of the particles. So in this scenario, the environment gets extended with a sublayer that becomes visible for others. But this is now a complete mix. I take the environment, body reaction, and talk about cognition. So let me explain how this is linked all together with this last reference that makes me so curious about the project. It is the embodied cognition that follows the idea that the mind is not only connected to the body, but that the body also influences the mind. To illustrate this, Swedish scientists ran a study in which they were presenting a visual stimuli in form of this picture. They tracked the eye movements while observing and then removed the picture. Then the participants were asked to reconstruct the content. Even they were looking at a white wall, they reproduced the eye movements during their cognitive activity. So this study shows the link between environment, cognition, and bodily behavior, and brings me to my design question. How can I visualize the sublayer of the person's space in a three-dimensional environment? And therefore, because it is all linked and looped, I built the setup of the design loop, my second chapter. So I will work in the real world and the digital world. The typology of the real environment is determined by environmental influences, physics, and the user. I scan parts of it and measure the actions of the person. These measurements will be visualized in an architectural structure as a sublayer with its own typology in the digital space. I defined the base structure as a personal vector field that is linked up with the sensors. It will allow to run a spatial particle system that reacts to the environment and the behavior of the person inside. The arousal sensors, GSR and heart rate, inform the vector field and take on different forces and colors according to the measurement. The motoric sensors, the eye tracker, informs the organization and builds up the spatial structure. To recap, the fixation duration determines the length, the GSR value, the speed, and the heart rate, the advection. With this data, I built my design loop. First, I prepare the stimuli where the person is located and the measurement should take place. Second, the person gets exposed and interacts with the surrounding. Third, the measurements are made. And fourth, the biofeedback is recorded and translated into a field line. This loop is repeated every second to form the vector field for the personal space. To keep this loop running iteratively, these are the components that bring it to life. The biometric sensors send the values via an MQTT network to the design tool, which computes the data stream to the design and outputs the visualization digitally. With this all said and done, let's take a look how this actually works all together in the live design La Rêverie. First, I measure the values in the real world setting and the environment. Then I digitalize the key parts of the environment. Third, I apply the personal space structure to the real environment and visualize it digitally that it can be experienced. For the case study, I chose a real site where I bring the person to experience it. It is an old weaving hall, built in 1908 and since 1993 out of use. With its 10,000 square meters and lots of side rooms, there's plenty to discover. Due to the multiple uses during the last decades, it has a diverse history and lots of people have a different relation to the site. So wandering the site with the design tool, wherever the person spends time to look at, will start an interaction. Therefore, I designed a little interface, and this interaction is displayed in the design tool cockpit. The basic information is displayed up left, then the fixation points and the galvanic skin response and heart rate values. the local manipulation of the field forces, as well as the largest field lines. And last, the velocity indicator. So let's have a look. We're ready to launch the design tool in this video. I will just switch to screen sharing. And there we go. Just a moment. All right, this is the right screen now.
For running the design tool La Rêverie, an environment is needed that exists in the real and digital space. A person gets equipped with the sensors for eye tracking, galvanic skin response, and heart rate. To understand the function of the tool, we now enter the view position of the person and see how the layer of the personal space builds up. As the person focuses their gaze on one point, the position gets recorded. This builds up a spatial arrangement of fixation points. The most occupied points become the most interesting, and field lines start to build up from those fixation points. They orient themselves according to the surface of the environment, and long fixations will increase the length of the field line. With the arousal state of the person, the field changes its voice, overall and local. Let's take a look at one specific field line. The field lines have an effect on particles in the environment. Here you can see how they behave with different GSR levels and HL levels. This is only one field line for one fixation point. During the process, a whole network of them evolves. Together, the field lines form a unique vector field that drives the particles. Here is the system shown in the network with speed indicator that reveals how the velocity is distributed in the system. Later on, the velocity is represented by the color. Now back to the viewport of the person. During the process, there are particles emitted. In this case, for every iteration, 2,500, which equals the total amount of gaze points recorded from the person in the environment. These particles flow along the person field and change their speed and accumulation according to the biofeedback of the person. This makes it possible to express with the same morphology different states of personal spaces. If a different person wears the design tool in the same environment, the surrounding adapts to the specific personal reaction and behavior in the environment. This gives us the ability to visualize a connection between the environment and how people perceive and subconsciously react to it.
All right. So I hope you have now a clearer vision of it, how it could work. So this takes me to my last chapter, this design outcome of the personal space. And as you can see, yes, as you can see here, the tool is capable of activating the same space in different ways. For instance, here are two different spatial arrangements that the case study person created during their visit. So like two different persons, two different outcomes there. And this is how the personal space will turn out in situ. There's later on the video for that. We first take a look to gain a deeper understanding and have a detailed look at the personal space in a drawing. To make it readable, I underlie as basic graduation scale. The measured person is located in the middle. For the overview, this is the actual scene of the site. We will only use the geometry of the relevant surrounding for calculate the field line direction. I will apply the gaze structure next. These are the fixation points and also the starting point. And finally, the whole particle system that is driven by the field of the personal space. With a different person, a different field will build up according to the individual behavior. And this makes it possible to evaluate and describe the personal space with the different gaze patterns and subconscious reactions in a drawing. So let's compare it. Where to the left, we have an overall relaxed reaction with medium fixation times. To the right, the person has plenty strong arousal moments with longer fixations. That results in a more complex field with more variation in color, velocity, and complexity of field lines. As a last step, let's dive in and have a look how those personal spaces turn out in this animation.
always wondered about the story of spaces, the story they could tell from people. But these stories are in the head. The person could tell, but only if we are there at the same time, to the same spot. Isn't there a way to leave those tracks back in the space? How someone perceived and reacted and felt in the environment? Where did they look? What did they feel? Can this be told in a special story?
Now to conclude, the person in space exists in every space, and this is my first approach to visualize it. The result is a design tool that lets you experience a part of these connections between space and human perception in an immersive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the presentation.
So it's open to comment.
I can start. Sorry about that.
Start.
No, go right ahead.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say, this is part of a field, though profoundly important, is still hugely underpopulated by research projects. So I was really pleased to see your subject matter. I think the subject in and of itself is significant, and to not just one field, but to many fields. I thought you executed this beautifully. I thought at the level of concept, this is a really interesting idea. I think it's a very fertile ground in that it feels to me that, this really is the tip of the iceberg. This is your catalyst, if you like. I felt that your use of the data was really interesting. You've, shown a real understanding of how that information can be conveyed, how it can be used creatively. I think the one weakness in your project at the moment is the fact that visually, although these are very rich images diagrammatically, including the one that's showing on the screen now, we've got such a huge amount of data and information in these graphics that one can't actually see. Well, I mean, I'm viewing this on a laptop screen, so that's obviously going to be downsizing it, but it's very difficult to read this on certainly my computer screen, and I'm guessing actually on a standard PC screen. That there's so much information. So my main critique, I think the main thing you need to think about is the scaling of your images and your data, and think about the fact that when you're putting a presentation together, you may need to summarize some of the information differently. You may need to reconfigure some of your images. And just think about that scaling, because if I were viewing this information on a big screen, let's say we had a whole wall in an exhibition space, it would be a different story, but I'm obviously not. And particularly because of the fact that your project is in the digital space. I mean, in terms of applications of where you might take this research, one of the most obvious things, I mean, yes, this applies to architecture in the physical sense, as in telling that story of how people engage and interact and perceive their environment and how that affects their emotional states. And there's so much that you could build on. I mean, one of the richest areas of actually research areas in terms of cognitive response to space is in the prison space, and looking at how you work with individuals in hospitals, looking at how you work with troubled persons, or persons that have got a lot going on mentally, in order to manipulate that space in a way that can either help change their mental state or can help heal them, and so forth. But actually for gaming, I think this could be incredibly important, because one of the things we unfortunately tend to see in the digital space, and this is particularly prominent in respect of some of the online events that we've seen spring up in the pandemic, is a real inability, if you like, on the part of many games and many web designers to imagine space differently, in that what they tend to do is they tend to try and build the offline online. And so you go into rooms and you go into this sort of landscapes that are structured in a way that mirrors the real world, when in effect the virtual world is a dream. The virtual world is a space in which, you know, your avatar doesn't have to be human. It could be a creature, it could be a mythological god, and, you know, you could be, like in your dreams, flying around, not walking around, or, you know, it's a totally different arena, and the research that is informing that is actually far too narrow. There's far too little research. So I think that your project it's important, certainly at the application of physical architecture and landscapes, but it's also very important in the digital space. So a really interesting project. I really like the ideas behind it, and I just think it's at the level of your conveying of complex information that you could, you know, you could tweak this a bit to make it a little bit more impactful when you're presenting.
Thank you. Yes, like all the research, all the what comes behind that you said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I felt it also during the project, and it was massive and overwhelming. And it's also like a lot of personal intent in there, because I'm personally interested in it, and so it was a bit of a struggle putting it all together, and don't get too far into one direction and to the other. And now I'm glad I can look onto a project and we can discuss it, and actually it carries the message. So thank you very much.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to jump in. Thank you very much, Melissa, for your comments, and thank you, Robert, for your presentation. Very dynamic and beautiful. But you know, when someone uses the word beauty, there's an issue. So I guess I'm coming at this from looking at this as computer science, spatial research, and then thinking about the evolution of architecture. So I worked with a few entrepreneurs on launching projects for, you know, investment. So the first thing that I would say is, you did a great job laying the groundwork, but someone needs to hear exactly what your entire project is in the first few minutes, so that we can really conceive how our experiences and what current research is doing can interconnect. So think of all this as positive. Great project, very beautiful, but how do you take it to the next step? And then how do you take it beyond architecture? Because you need investment from all, you know, all boats, right? I guess the next thing I would say is, critically, when I look at it, I'm imagining, okay, I'm going into a space and I'm having my eyes fixate, right? But then what is the experiment that you're fixating? So a few spatial research projects that I've been around, you know, there's a fixation, but you would have an experiment. So what would be the objective? And I think you would get rich results that way, because right now it's so loose that I think I would see pretty much the same thing over and over and over, unless you create programs that learn from millions of people going to the Venice Biennale, let's say, or going to the Louvre. And then your project is building on a database of, you know, many spaces, right? But I just wanted to hear more of a pointed objective, like what is the key of this visual fixation that leads to these beautiful shapes? Now, what's really beautiful and interesting is that, do these shapes, when they touch my body, when I'm going through the space, what stimulus does it give me? Like, do I feel warm like a pet? Is it like a kiss? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So yesterday I went to the ocean for sunset, and I sat down and I saw hundreds of beautiful pets and people, and some of them came to me. That one moment of having that proximity of a body and myself caused a reaction. So that means in your system, that would give another response. So all good things, all great. I would also say that you should look at some computer science research and maybe some other research that looks at these types of abstract typologies in a digitized space and what other reactions you get. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I jump in. Robert, like, really, really big congratulations. You know, we've been knowing each other for a while, since the master, and already at the time you did a project that was highly speculative, right? And it was at the same time engaging with the brief of the studio and with the techniques, but also then taking a direction of its own. And I think that what is I found really beautiful here is that there is again a lot of the platforms that we have developed in the lab, but then again your direction is highly original, and it's at the same time, as Melissa has pointed out, very relevant. So my concern at the green light was that you were carried away a little bit to with the technology, and you were really deep into developing this workflow, which by the way I think you did very well for the time, and it's credible for sure. Although of course, as Gustavo was mentioning, there is so much that can be integrated, and obviously at some point a team needs to come around something like this. But I think it's credible, the workflow you put together. But at the same time, I think you finally also balanced it quite well in the last period with a kind of zooming out and trying to reassess what was this doing for you. And again, it's always hard, I think, when you are into it to do that. And I think the comments you got before, it's very, very relevant. There are so many potentials, but at the same time, it needs to be much sharper, maybe much at the beginning even narrower, the scope of this, and then from there eventually grow out. But again, I think that for me it embodies what Claudia and Maria and everyone is trying to do in the lab, which is to really transform the thesis project into the beginning of something that can go much farther. So this is not just a little homework project, but it's really about opening up a new career, maybe a new startup, maybe a new PhD, that depends on you. But there is a lot of possibilities opening up with this project. I think you embodied that very well. Finally, I thought that I already mentioned that to you last time. For me, there is this element of memory that is very, very important, and it's a topic kind of present in architecture a lot. For example, we are experiencing it here, where our studio here is in Hackney Wick. The whole neighborhood has been somehow demolished and rebuilt in a flash, and there is a lot of loss in this process. And I kind of feel that your project really beautifully illustrates what does it mean, really losing this connection. It is really about your brain being embedded into these spaces. For people that spend many years working in a space, in a factory and so on, there is their brain is embedded in it physically. And I think in a way, the way you sort of capture that, for me, is very beautiful. And again, it may not be the biggest application of your technology, but at the same time, I think it's a very significant contribution to the conversation of architecture, especially when we talk about regeneration of neighborhoods, of areas. What does it mean to regenerate? And how do you capture the memory that is embedded in a space and in the people that used it? How do you somehow bring it to the future of that place, which necessarily will have to change and evolve, like everything. So again, big congratulations, and it's a pleasure to see the final presentation.
Thank you, Marco.
Marco, I wanted to step in. You said something interesting, the idea of memory. And what's really fascinating there is that there's a lot of research with that, one. And then two, there are technologies that are coming into the fore, like the metaverse from NVIDIA. Or have you heard of Magic Leap? I think Magic Leap, they wanted to make a complete economy. They wanted to digitize everything in the entire planet, with banking, with governments, and with people. So, and then finally, when I look at this type of application, NASA, like, we're going to put people into Mars, and we're going to try to do all this, that, or the other, but they're captive people, right? So if you can think about this, maybe you should look at what is the latest research on experimentation with either captivity or these new economies that are coming out? Because I think that's where you're going to get some investment and some interest, because that seems to be new territory as a designer. And, you know, for you to claim anything other than that, that's where you have a team of scientists and engineers to help your vision. So for me, architecture has always been powerful because you can persuade an entire stadium of people with one picture. So, and when it comes to the pictures, you make beautiful things. So thanks. Thank you.
Just a quick question, Robert. Is this available in VR? Like, can we access it with a headset from here, or you haven't built it up into any platform yet?
You can only access it if you have a computer. So like the geometry is too heavy to export it, but with a Wi-Fi, if it's directly connected to a computer, it would work, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, you know, some of the experiments we have done last semester with Mozilla Hubs, for example, quite quick way to sketch, if you want, immersive environments. But I could see this, you know, implemented at least as a kind of demo version, a proof of concept version. I think would be very powerful. And I don't know, maybe you can have a word also with Tole or some of the other guys that worked on with us on that last semester. And it would be maybe a fairly quick but very useful appendix to what you have done so far to just make it much more engaging, and you know, potentially you can just share it with everyone just with the link. It's you know, at least, as I said, as a sort of demo proof of concept version could work very well.
We already had this in mind, but yeah, at the moment it won't work with this geometry, and otherwise it would be a drawback in aesthetics. So it's, yeah, but I think we can figure it out, and that would be very important, because then people can actually see it, and that's what it is and what it counts, and to brief it in 2 minutes and someone grasp it directly. So yes, thank you.
I'd just quickly add to something as well that Marco said. I do think development-wise that you have got a couple of routes with this. I completely agree with Gustav in terms of the commercial arena. I think if you were thinking about developing this within the built environment context, one of the areas that you might think in terms of how you might, for example, develop this into a PhD would be looking one of the really rich areas, one of the actually critical areas in terms of city development, is the fact that the topologies and the general, as it were, proposition of the architectures that are being proposed for the future is very, very different to that of the past. So, for example, if we look to the developing world, we see that whereas historically places, you know, many cities in the likes of India and across Asia were very low rise, they were very organic in the way that they emerged, in that when you look to the architectures, you see layer upon layer upon layer of different ages, different generations augmenting the architecture. And in that sense, they were very true to the historical journey of city development. What we're now seeing is we see developers go in with that tabula rasa grand schema, wherein effectively they destroy the pre-existing structure. So they either take out all of the houses and everything that was there, and then they build anew, and usually they build high rise because, of course, the development is being driven by profit, and so they're trying to get as much return on the value of the land, extrapolate the highest return on investment. And what those typologies do is they have a profound emotional effect on people. I know this from some of the research I did on the ground in India in 2014. And what we found was that people of all different demographies throughout the city, from the poorest of the poor to, you know, the professors and the wealthy business persons, at the emotional level, at the level of their psychological functioning, many felt profoundly disturbed by the new development proposals. They were so opposed to them on every single level of their personhood that they were greatly concerned. But that, of course, it's not, of course, just a problem for India. It's a problem worldwide. And this is a very under-researched field. It's not without historical precedent, but it's a very rich field, and it's very, very important because, of course, when people are not happy in their environment, we see all sorts of profound problems emerge. We know that, we've tracked that. And I think that your research could be built out into a research program. You would really have to structure it, but certainly I think, if the Synthetic Landscape Lab were going to try and, work with this into a bigger research program, I think that would be a rich area. And I think that is the kind of area you might get grant funding to fund a PhD or a bigger development program. So if you're thinking in terms of how it might be applied to, if you like, non-digital arena, that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
I was about to say what Melissa said is very true. And then also thinking about it, I haven't really seen a tool that way for, let's say, investment. So basically, I see rich investors and business people come into a site and they're dreaming from their head. So, but this kind of tool, you could actually see the site digitized and you can see all the appendages of the city coming to them. So that actually could be another metric that you could use for kind of this value appraisal of a new construction project. And I would also say that there is precedent in sciences where, nature does actually add value. So what if there are green that's, established in in a facade? Like, would that actually be something that you could start changing the way that we construct at the code level? Because you would have data points to go to the city or go to investors with, right? So I would agree with Melissa. There is a lot of precedent, and I think that this would be a great way for you, if you get funding or however, this would be a great way to continue a line of research that is very clear and crisp. Like, you could actually probably, if you get the base documents, start aligning and creating a new type of awareness of this type of value. And I would guess finally, I don't know if, automotive, I remember a few of my friends worked for, like BMW, let's say. Like, how does this work if you're in a car? Like, you can get into a car and then maybe the idea is that, or a train, how do you know that this isn't going to work for you, for people that are traveling? So there's so many applications, but I would encourage you to maybe think about what Melissa just said and focus it.
Then, yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad that it goes into a direction that is developing from now. And
yeah, I agree with the comment. I think congratulations on the project, and it touches on definitely a set of research area that the lab is interested in. As Adler pointed out, it will be a next step to understand how these data are actualized and which type of data exactly we work with. Because there might be a need to be able to visualize information or to interact, especially with information that we usually don't interact with. But there is also not the need of increasing exponentially the amount of information that are out there in the planets. So for me, the question of testing through VR or being more specific with the data and the representation is not only a question of having the project more actualized, but it's really a question of ecology. There is a sort of fields that you have underlined or started to discuss, but it can go both ways, depending from which data you start to work with. So if you're interested to continue the research, for me it's important that you become more and more consistent in the type of data you work with and in the way this one-to-one interaction is not only designed, but is developed step by step during the design process.
Thank you very much all for the comments. I know that Teresa has a little input. Teresa, jump in, please.
Thank you, Maria. I know we are short on time, so I'll try to be short and quick. I first wanted to congratulate you for the project. I think it's absolutely spectacular and also big inspiration for me as we share certain common interests. I've seen your project at a very early stage, I have to say, so it was a really nice a surprise that you have managed to manifest and visualize what you are studying, these what you call personal spaces in a visual language through the prototype that you build with the sensors. And I had maybe just one little suggestion that, of course, the way you visualize and present your project, it really, everything has been already said, gives us so many options of what can be next and how you could build on this project further. But I also wanted to encourage you maybe to also look back a little bit at the theoretical background of your project, which didn't really change from the moment I've seen it last time. And now is also time to reflect back, because something that you somehow refer to as a personal space has been already determined in the terminology since 60s and early 70s, whether by Lynch calling it mental maps or Downsestea at early 70s coining the term individual cognitive maps. So these sort of individual cognitive spaces or maps that you visualize, they also have certain background where I would definitely go back and link, you know, back and forth. Finally, I wanted to also get back to the part of your presentation where you were talking about the embodied connection, you know, which is also, of course, topic where I'm interested in, and is not anymore a critique, but maybe I want to share a little bit of what I was also looking at recently, because obviously you talk there about the loop of mind influencing the body, but at the same time body influencing the mind. But then we need to have a look at, you had this little diagram with parasympathetic and sympathetic system, but we know that the GSR sort of sensor and heart rate system sensor, or the visual language that we perceive through our sensors of vision, is still quite very much connected to the sympathetic system. We're talking about the loop between senses and especially through the vision, the senses and the mind. But when it comes to the parasympathetic system, this is something I started to study recently a little bit, is mostly relating to the metabolic capacity of our bodies. No? So is not only that my heart rate is a bit rising up, or that I see something, but is actually related also to how I move and what I eat, which is incredible, is another level, no? Is the metabolic capacity of our bodies and how our cells react to any kind of input directly influence. And this would be the direct body to mind exchange. Yeah. Is another level, another step where well, maybe one day we connect the research. But it's just one little part where I started to look at recently. So I wanted to share.
Yes, thank you very much.
Great project anyway.
Thanks.
I enjoyed your presentation a lot.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the great discussion. I want to congratulate Rob from my side here as well. That has been a great pleasure working with you, and I'm happy to see the result at this level of development. And you also did a great push recently in the last month. And I think, yeah, we see a result of a great work. So I propose to close with this presentation now. Applause to Rob. Thank you very much for the comments. And we would need to go to the presentations of Ricardo. But before that, I want to welcome Dr. Daniel Köchler, who has joined us. Daniel, thank you very much for finding time. I have already introduced you before we started the presentation. So guys, we're waiting for you. So just to give you a very brief note that we are running through the presentations of the different courses. Now we had the diploma project Then we will have a pre-diploma, and then we will see different courses, seminars, design studio from the different levels of the students, different courses, bachelor, master. So we have a mixed review. So be expected to navigate through and catch different presentations together.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for joining. Ricardo, the stage is yours. We can start.
Thank you. Yeah, I will share the screen now.
So for Ricardo, we can give a comment to continue the project because he still will have half a year to complete the project within the diploma.
Thank you for the introduction. Do you all see the screen?
Maybe even 1 year, we will see.
Let's see. Ricardo, could you please go full screen? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the title of my pre-diploma presentation is Zero Hat. And the reason for this title is that my goal is to design a building system for delocalized huts that is meant to be built by replacing the usual construction material, and by that I'm speaking of concrete, and building it by taking full advantage of on-site robotic fabrication. And this can guarantee us a reduction in pollution due to concrete industry, and as well reduction in construction site pollution, such as material transportation and machine usage. To start my project, my work, I of course choose to collect material from a specific location that is a shore along the river Inn, and by that we can see, investigating the material, how also in a very small limited location like this one, where that might be one day a potential site location where robots could produce directly the hut. We have at our available to us different material. For example, in the sand I found on the location had different size in it. Like, we had one type that was right after the water line, and it was kind of a lime sand. And the further we collect the sand toward further from the river, the sand became bigger, and that's due to water flow that brought the smaller sand ashore, and the wind that brought the bigger grains of sand away from the water. So later on, to simulate the deposition of the material of this zero impact material that I want to use instead of concrete, I did a robotic simulation, and I first drew a path that was meant to be, in this case, kind of a brick, but the design is still to be determined. And we can see from a short video here the experimentation of the deposition and the simulation that, of course, might be useful in this case, for example, to understand and have a preview of about the data of the print itself. For example, the volume or the weight, the mass of the deposed material. And now I'm going to show you briefly the tools that I need to start the production of this material. And starting with the compressor and a valve in order to adjust the pressure that goes inside of a chamber chamber that stores the material. And thanks to this valve, we can change the pressure inside of the chamber that push the material outside the printer. This is an industrial printer that I used to produce the first prototypes and tests. So this one is the first test I produced using clay and sand and of course water to bind all the compounds of the mixture. And from this first study, of course, it's not very successful. It was just the first one. I could already notice some important characteristics that are, for example, the mass loss due to water evaporation along time, and as well the stiffness that the mixture had also kept after the drying process. And due to the shrinking that it was anyway minimal, cracks appeared along the structure. Here I documented the drying process of the material, and this is over a time span of 78 hours. That is the total amount of time that the material needed to dry completely. And by drying, what I mean is the loss of water, and so the loss of mass. And from the graph, we can see that it started from 440 gram and reached the 343 gram. This based on the previous mixture that was sand, clay, and water. And in this case, it was about 1/3 per each ingredient. So for a total of 470 gram. The first 30 grams that have been lost are probably the remaining material that was stored in the pipe system to the printer. And in this graph, we notice a peak that happened when I exposed the material during the drying process outside, not directly under the sun, but the temperature was very high outside. It was 26 degrees and the air was very dry. And this gave a very high peak in the drying process. That means that in the case of on-site fabrication, if of course the weather conditions are like this, the material have a much faster rate of drying. Since we saw the result of the first printing test, some things had to be changed in the process. Starting of course with the nozzle that was custom produced. In the corner on the left, we can see an early attempt, an early setup of the first nozzle that was very experimental. So I designed a different nozzle that also allowed me to calibrate the height, so the distance from the printing plate. And for the material, I choose the TPU. Here is an exploded diagram that can help us understand better the parts of the nozzle. And here is the mounted nozzle on the printer. And the reason I choose a TPU as material, that is a flexible plastic material, but very strong as well, is shown in the right corner. And for example, in this case, the code wasn't calibrated very good, and the nozzle crashed into the plate. But thanks to the fact that the plastic is slightly flexible, we avoid any damage to the printer. And of course, the fact that it's flexible guarantees us also much simpler fit to other parts in the experiment, like the pipes connection and so on. So next we come to the final material mixture that I tested in my early stage of the diploma work, and it is to add another material to the mixture, that is soil. Since the idea is to produce in situ hut, robotically fabricated, it might happen as well that soil is present on the inside. So here we have an overview of the mixture compounds, and to those, of course, water is as well added. And on the left, in the left diagram, we have a preview of the different tryouts that I did for the mixture, that we are now going to see better in detail. For every one of them, amount of material change. As far as concerned the amount of clay, this one changed us a little bit, but the amount of soil and sand, of course, played the biggest role in it, since the rheology, that means the capability of the material to flow through the pipes is mostly influenced by bigger material in the mixture, and that are sand and, of course, earth, soil. From those, the third type of mixture was the better one, and that was the one I tried in my final printing test. And before jumping into the test, I want to talk about the shape that I'm going to, the design shape that I'm going to print. And here I did a small catalog of different shapes that allow us to have different curvature and different angles for the geometry that have to be tested from the printer and from the material itself. In this case, they are based on iterative loop based curves. So that means that are subdivided in smaller parts, and then they grow iteratively in a surface, in a boundary surface. And then they are lofted and scaled in order to reach certain angles. Here we have a preview of the last printed test. And as we can see on the left, we have the digital draw of the chosen geometry, and with the total amount of total number of layers and the actual number of printed layers, because due to lack of material, because the material ran out too soon, so the calculation was wrong. But as we can see on the left side, on the right side of the presentation, sorry, we can see the 12 printed layers that also embedded at an angle of more than 30 degrees. That is quite successful, since the structure came out very, very strong and stiff. also after the drying process. And here is again a small video to document the printing of the material.
Ricardo, we need to start closing the presentation.
Okay, yeah, the video is just 1 minute, and I have another slide, and then it's it. Okay, so you can imagine it goes up and then till 12, having 12 layers. And yeah, an error that occurred here, since the valve was adjusted manually, the pressure was too high at the beginning, where a lot of material was lost because too much material was pumped out. And that's also the reason why the amount of layer was limited to 12. And for regarding for the test geometry, I did another catalog of shapes that again could help me understand better the capability of the material. And this is the first investigation about the material, the investigation of the material. And as a second second part of my master thesis, I'm going to develop the design for those delocalized huts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for the presentation. We open for the comments.
I guess I'll start.
Super.
I wanted to say thank you very much for the presentation. Can you summarize very quickly in the objectives of what you're doing with the shapes? Your technology is, and I'm just presupposing here, your technology is building on existing technology that's going to make these type of, there's going to be more complexity, right?
Yeah,
definitely. Okay. So then my question is, with that complexity, what is the limit? What is the limit that you can reach? Because right now what I see is that you are creating a different type, but then working with engineers, there's a breakage of that type. Then there's the known, and then there's the unknown. So I'm just saying, did you play with that edge? You know, what other happy accidents can your system do, or your design process make? I guess that would be my first question here.
So as happy accident, you refer to problem encountered along the prototyping testing process.
And opportunities as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, working with engineers, I realized that even the accidents can lead to discovery and new knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. So many was the failure actually along the prototyping process. And for example, not only collapsing of the structure itself when too much height along the z-axis was reached, because the base of the material, or also the width of the layer itself, was too small. This is something that influences a lot the characteristic of the geometry itself. But with that also talking about rheology and the amount of compounds that goes in the mixture, many times happens that the mixture didn't flow out of the nozzle because the rheology, so the amount of for example, soil was too much. That means too many were the particles, the particle with a big volume couldn't flow through pipes and stuff. So a reduction of those was needed, and also, for example, more hydration in the mixture.
One also thing I just wanted to interrupt a little bit It would also be nice, I guess, thinking about this as, in architecture, trying to communicate this to a client, it would be nice to maybe, when you have your visualizations, that you pretty much have maybe a mixture of, like, just like an experiment, here's the form and here's the DNA that made it, and these are the materials that, created this result. Because I bet you can add different layers of analytical frameworks when it comes to how they relate to each other. Because I'm very fascinated with the bubbly stuff, and I'm sorry I'm using loose language, but that right there gives me an aesthetic response. I feel like touching it, and I feel like doing something to it, as in hugging. So I used to do pottery, and I made all of those by hand. So, at some point, your arms get really big, and then you actually physically have a relationship with this thing, right? So that's what I'm asking you, is how do we get your data and your rigorous way of making this into more of a experimental analytical approach and then an embodied approach? But I wanted to thank you for all of your work and what you presented today.
Thank you for the comments.
Yeah, I would also directly continue on the congratulations. Like, as I understand, is a master thesis and like a in-between presentation. So
it's a new thing in Innsbruck. It was probably not there in the old curriculum. So basically, the pre-diploma is for us, while we work in our lab, is the setup of the brief for the thesis. And then will take 6 months, sometime 1 year. I think we are somewhere in between, maybe. So I think there will be still work to do, but it's the setup. So it declares what the thesis will do, and also set up the drawing technique and the design innovation that the thesis bring forward. Because in our lab, usually we go towards design innovation with the thesis and then later in the PhD. I hope that helps.
I think is a very strong and also very rigorous design, or like a research and proposition. But also in the scope of a master thesis, it's clear that this research, as you set it up, is so serious or so like real scale application. Realistically speaking, I don't think that you will solve it in the scope of a master thesis. It's like a perfect setup even for a PhD research and so on, material studies. So I'm more interested actually in your thesis itself, like the first slide, so how you begin with your statement. And of course, it's very bold when you talk about the zero hut, because like as an architect, I instantly like think about primitive hut. Now I think of all this legacy that you modernism has really like way back, Renaissance and so on. You take something and you begin to use it for anthropocentric point of view. Like Lugier, like this famous image, you point to trees and use the trees as a hut. Later you have, there's also legacy in Austria that you have Adolf Loos. You say architecture begins with a buried body. So in a way, like just when you take a human into a soil, to ground, you get the beginning of architecture. Or like Holland has to find something. The idea of a found object also goes in that direction. That you say there's something there, and if it's an airline or whatever, I take it as a human. So, and you begin with that struggle that you say, I take that out in a way. So they take, I want to reduce everything from this kind of using. And it's not only a reduction from that. You begin like really from ground up, very careful to think at a microbiological scale how materiality can be organized. But I think also assume that because you talked then also about soil and clay and these differences, that it's also about symbiosis with biological systems in that print, or how that in a way as a dwelling something works. So when I see this as a column, I see it always as a part of a further environment. And I would hope that those kind of struggle of a discussion, how that way reflects back, and maybe this is also what Gustavo pointed at, like what actually you produce additionally to that. And it's clear when you have these printing and makes this kind of spaghetti foldings, which are super beautiful. It's clear that this creates a kind of porosity for kind of different kind of ventilation. So you create already like effects of a microclimate. The same is like with the clay itself. A clay is breathing, or it's like it's changed the humidity of environment. So I would be also interested when you, in a way, make a proposition how that scales up, that in a way it dwells on that kind of dialogue. You know, like not in a way. I think it's much stronger what you have. You have now very careful research on the machine and in general, like how you construct it, and in a way you prove a feasibility of that concept. But I think you can really just a sketch would be already good. You know, an image rendering, how in a way that falls back into kind of really like a living environment, and it's I think as a strong background to the thesis.
Yeah, I think that the setup of the drawing and also what Gustavo was pointing out, how opportunity emerges, something that really you need to tackle at the beginning of your thesis, because somehow you have done hypothesis and on the realm of technology, and you went very much straightforward in trying to test in that hypothesis. But by going so straightforward, I think you lost a little bit other opportunity that might emerge from the observation of the behavior of what you are actually producing. So for me, it's a question of a step back and trying to speculate of how these can have repercussions spatially, but also how you can set up material experiment that you observe without necessarily having the precondition of an expectation. And I think you did very well what you were set up to do, but in order to give relevance to design, you need to give chance, what Gustavo called chance or coincidence or an opportunity. And to do that, you need to have a setup where you can observe where the unexpected can happen. And that is something that didn't emerge yet, and I think you need to do very soon in your thesis to be able to do a step forward in terms of design. Often when you discuss, there is a question, and this didn't work because, you know, the particles were too big. Yeah, it didn't work for the expected technocratic realm from which you were looking at the proposal, but it might work from other point of view. If you observe what happened for a longer time. I know there has been difficulties, and I have to say I commend the fact that you managed to do a pre-diploma based on material experimentation in a time in which everything seems to sit on the virtual, on reality, on the virtual realm. So that I need to commend, but I think it's really important that we find a way, although maybe communicating virtually, hopefully physically soon before you finish the thesis, to set up an observation that allow you to explore this extra quality on the material prototype. That will lead you to design, will lead you to define the zero at, maybe not zero, I don't know, we will need to see the at with some other name, to define what is at is on multiple level, and in that way being a synthetic landscape or an architecture and not a purely technocratic experimentation. But thank you.
If you can jump in 1 second, I think there was well, first of all, yeah, I think it's a very good setup for a thesis technically. Let's say from the point of view of your intention, there was maybe one moment which I found it was quite sweet at the beginning of the presentation, where you were there like playing with the sand at the edge of the river, a bit like a kid. It was quite sweet image. I don't know if it was you or somebody, but yeah, exactly. Is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I thought this image was quite sweet, and you know, at the end of the day, I also liked the idea that you kind of recognize the river as a kind of a sorting machine in a way that kind of a, you know, through sedimentation already produces a kind of a clear array of materials and sands which are kind of differentiated by granulometry and properties and so on, but that of course in the realm of the river are also very much creating these kind of liminal conditions for wildlife and other systems to grow and to proliferate. So that's the beauty of the rivers, and especially the fact that rivers move and have this continuous reorganization, and which makes them alive and wild. But let's say so that element of the landscape, I think, which just appeared here, I don't know, I just felt that it would be kind of beautiful that if it was going to return throughout the process in a sense, and so that leads me to think more about what do you mean by in situ robotic printing, right? So that means that you have a machine that essentially is installed in a site, and so the question is this machine only temporarily deployed during construction phase, or how long is the construction phase going to last? And so to what extent this machine becomes part of the site or part of the dynamics of the site, or not, right? So of course you have for example quarries that are places where normally sands and gravels and so on for cement come from, and they are in fact sites of extraction, often along or inside rivers, with big machines operating there all the time, which by the way, these are places I always liked a lot, but typically the mind frame of the quarry is basically just to extract, right? And whereas in your case there is a will to transform and to create something more, but this creation, how does it fit back into the ecology of the place? I think it's a very interesting question, and in that sense also conceptually, how does the machine become part of this expanded fabrication milieu, if you want? This, of course, connects with a quite exciting tradition in Italy, where you are from, because, of course, Enrico Dini, everybody knows as the initiator, perhaps, of a certain approach to large-scale 3D printing. But also Enrico he started from the idea of taking powder from the marble extraction quarry and reuse it, right? So using waste material, and reuse it. And his first machine, although he built it into this kind of warehouse, it was always intended to be on site, to be a machine that would be able to be dismantled. In fact, it was all made with trestles and so on, and reassembled on site. And then more recently, this tradition has been reinvigorated by, of course, the WASP team, and I'm sure you saw recently the project they did with Mario Cucinella, which in a way it's very interesting. But all of these experimentations are in a sense kind of ignorant of the landscape, if you want. They are very much about taking just a very neutral flat plot and put their machines, for obvious reasons. It's kind of easier. So I wonder whether in your thesis there could be room for that element of the environment, of the landscape, of the river, of the microclimatic changes, the humidity, etc., to enter through the technological lens that you already set up very well, but then without allowing that lens to erase it completely, like it often happens, and instead look at it as some of the comments before was mentioning, as opportunities, opportunities to question what does it mean, for example, in situ robotic fabrication in the context of a synthetic landscape, in a context of an extended ecological milieu, in a context of the interaction between systems that on the surface are completely different and perhaps incompatible. So I think this will prove or provide you with a kind of elements that could sort of define your thesis as very unique. Perhaps in a sense, positions it in relationship to these other experiments, in relation to this great tradition that there is in Italy, but with your unique take, right? And I think that would be quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for the comments. They're very, very constructive.
Yeah, if I can just jump in. This, to me, is a problematic project. And I think it's probably best to frame that with some of the questions that your presentation has not answered and that are absolutely pertinent to your material source. So you've started your project, you've started this presentation at a riverside where we realize that, you know, you're going to be extracting sand from that site. And yet you haven't touched on the fact that sand extraction is the second biggest problem in the built environment. It is an absolute crisis. This is a problem so great that nations are at war. So we have, we've got the dispute between Indonesia and Singapore over the fact that illegal sand extraction has been used in the process of supplying Singapore with building materials. This is a crisis all over Asia. It's a really serious crisis. And it's a problem of essentially, people going to the riverside, treating it like it's some sort of, resource supply chain, and in complete oblivion to not only the local ecologies, but to the entire landscape, to how sand extraction impacts on the flow of rivers, how that in turn affects all the landscape and so forth. You have completely avoided that subject at the start of this presentation, and it should have been in there. It should have been something that you addressed, because you cannot speak to this subject without talking to that. So firstly, if you haven't yet read it, you need to read Sand Stories, and you need to do that immediately so that you fully understand the problem. Kieran Piera is the author. Just Google Sand Stories. There's a whole website on it. That for me is the starting point here. So you've got to address this question of, how is it in effect that you are going to justify going and sourcing direct from this environment? The second issue that you need to think about is the fact that you're essentially taking a machine, you're taking an industrial process into the landscape. That is something that you need to justify. There was no attempt to do that in your presentation. Again, that is something that you would need to do early on in order to really defend this with vigor. The third question, and this in many ways is one of the most profound questions, is, there are many, many cultures around the world that have made huts from these very materials since pre-Bronze Age. We have been making huts from sand and so forth from at least the Paleolithic. And they do so in very, very short time scales. They completely understand the materiality. They are able with their hands to mix up the perfect formula to make huts that have the integrity and at the cycles that are required. And yet in this presentation, we have no attempt to, if you like, justify why we should bring a machine in to do what people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. So that for me is an unanswered question, but also that's an unanswered creative avenue, because in looking to these cultures, the many, many cultures around the world, I mean, one of the most impressive that I've seen is in Africa, in Kenya, for example, the Maasai. They are masters of building with one of the same material types. What can be learned from that? Why and how is it that bringing the industrial process, if you like, is actually going to build on what they have been doing, and they do really, really well. It may be that there is an advantage that you can bring to that, but that is not addressed in your project. So fundamentally at this stage, I'm looking at this and thinking, well, what is this actually going to add to the history of building and to architecture? The second question is that there are plenty of sites where we have these raw materials, but we have them in a state that, whereupon they are extracted from the environment, it is not going to detract from it, in that we know we not only have a global sand crisis, we have a global soil crisis. But of course, there are places where the soils are so polluted that they are not ecologically viable. The questions around that, well, could you work with these polluted soils? If you did, would that bring risks to human health and so forth? So I think you need to look at your material sources very, very deeply. You really need to be answering that question of why are you using these at and in what context are you using them? And what are the systemic impacts to the environment across time, in the immediacy, at distance, and across vast time scales, not just weeks or months, but over years, because of course rivers change their trajectories. And another reason why this is so pertinent now, of course, climate change is changing the course of rivers and all over the world. So you need to get into the systems that you are actually in effect trying to work with. You've got to understand those systems. Understanding them is your baseline for building out this project. At the level of technicality, as a material experiment in, if you like, the formula of, well, how much sand do I have to clay and soil? Yes, there is absolute validity in this experiment. And yes, there is definitely room to build on that. And, I think that the topology of what you're building, although I have seen similar experiments to this, there is a point to that. But in order to, if you like, that needs a really robust foundation. So I think you need to strip this right back. I think you need to think about your site. I think you need to think about the problems that are inherent in those sites, and then build out from that. Because, if we sort of are in a situation where we just think of the environment of building at the machine level, this presentation felt very machinic. It felt like it was all about the nuts and bolts. We're at risk of repeating the problems that have led us to the global crisis that we now find ourselves in. So I would put a bit less thought at this stage in your research on the machine itself. Go back to the question that, the questions that I've raised, and then take it out again, because this would be a many times more interesting and sophisticated project if it's actually solving problems. And at the moment, it's not solving problems of the environment. What it's actually seeking to do at the moment, it seems, is solve the problem of the material formula. And that, that you've got to go further than that, and you can go further than that. And I think creatively, this will be a lot, more interesting, a lot more dynamic, if you take those steps.
That has been a great feedback. And Ricardo, I hope that you're also taking notes, because I think it's fundamental to implement these comments in further steps for us. Thank you so much, everybody, for this great discussion. We really need to move on. But
very useful. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, applause, Ricardo. Thanks again. We need to move on, and we continue with the next presentation by Michael and Felix. And this is a presentation of Design Studio 2 with the subtitle Mutualism, run by Professor Claudia Pasquero, Carbinian Enzinger, and I have been also taking part within the studio for the portfolio reviews. So Michael and Felix, we invite you to present next.
Yeah,
So this is the final presentation of the Design Studio course, Bachelor Design Studio.
So I think now you should see the screen.
Right, oh, good. Okay. Yes.
So first of all, welcome to our presentation. Before we present you the outcome of the project, I just want to talk about the structure of a presentation. So at the beginning, I'm going to show you the plant which forms the base of our project. And after the short introduction, we're heading to our research where we'll show some surface analysis of different lichens. And the research also contains some beautiful microscopical images and also informative explanation of how this organism works. And after the research part, we're going to explain our concept and also the design process and finish our presentation with some beautiful line drawings, which shows our idea of the synthetic lichen pretty well. So as you already have seen on the first slide, we called our project Synthetic Lichen. And at the beginning of this semester, our task was to collect different plants. And while collecting, for example, also some moss in the forest, we also found many different lichen species. And in our opinion, lichens are absolutely stunning because they occur all over the world, can grow on so many different surfaces, such as wood, stone, concrete, steel, or even plastic. In the Alps, for example, on the one hand side, lichens can be found in the middle of Innsbruck, next to a street, for example. But at the same time, lichens can also populate the top of the Nordkette, for example. So they can be very resilient and populate extreme environments. But now I want to head to our research. As already mentioned, we analyze different lichen species with the help of micro and macro images to get a better understanding of their behavior and their relation to the environment. To compare the different lichens, we decided to create this catalog. So on the left-hand side, we added some additional information about their resilience, preferred orientation, and their habitat. So now I'm just going to explain the different analyses which we did. So for example, the flow line analysis and the proximity helps us to understand the surface, while the radiation analysis provides information about the areas which are exposed to solar radiation. So the whole goal of this kind of catalog was to collect as much information as possible about different species. So right here on the left-hand side, you can see the yellow picture. This is the Xanthoria periotina. And on the right next to it, on the sun exposure, habitat resilience, we just cataloged them depending where we found them and depending on our research. So this picture we took with a this was with a macro.
Yeah,
macro image, yeah. And the next one is also the Xanthoria periotina, but in a different scale. So right, this time this was with a micro image. So in comparison to this, we also analyzed the Xanthoria calcicola. And in comparison to the previous lichen, this lichen doesn't prefer that much sun, and that's why it's also orientated to the north and to the west. But this lichen is very resilient. That's also why you can find it in the center of Innsbruck, for example. And the next one is also a macro image. This is the Xanthopermella stenophila. So we did different analyses, and the usnea is different to the previous ones because it doesn't grow on a single surface, for example, and expands in those two-dimensional way, but really expands in a three-dimensional way. And that's why we are interested in those three-dimensional expanding, and also analyzed the Evernia brunastri. And the Evernia brunastri is really interesting because it's really expanding as the previous one in a three-dimensional way. And that's also why we decided to work with this one for our final design. So.
An important part of our research focused on the study of different lichen sections. And okay, yeah, now it goes. And we analyzed them microscopically, which helped us to understand how both symbiotic partners inside the lichen interact with each other and what their tasks are in this system. Lichen is made of mycelium and algae and consists of three main parts. These are the outer shell, which prevents the system from drying out and losing moisture. And it also acts as a general insulation. Then we have the algae cells. They are responsible for photosynthesis. They bind CO2 and they produce oxygen and sugar, and therefore they are the food source of the lichen. And the third is the inner mycelium structure, which forms the main support structure and handles all the water and nutrient supply to the algae cells. And we also took some zoomed in pictures. And in this one specifically, you can see very well how the microalgae cells are suspended inside the mycelium hyphae.
So I'm going to explain the concept. So we basically want to achieve a system, or rather a module, which stands free in an urban area. The system will be based on the structure and functionality of lichen, and therefore we use microalgae as our microorganism. To ensure the functionality, the algae needs to have enough sunlight so that photosynthesis can take place. But on the other hand, it needs to protect the algae from overheating when it's getting too hot. So by supplying our module with CO2, wastewater, and rainwater from the city or urban area, it can drastically improve the air quality by reducing the CO2 concentration, and it can produce heat for buildings, and it can produce as well biomass, which can be processed into biogas or biofuel and into food supplements. So therefore it is possible to reduce the demand on primary resources, which also leads to the reduction of deforestation, which is also an immense problem nowadays. So because we didn't want to limit ourselves to on two-dimensional analysis, we decided to do three-dimensional research. So for that, we made a 3D scan out of the Evernia prunastnia, which is our favorite lichen. And therefore, we made a 3D scan. Yeah. So, and yeah. No, could you go back?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we made a catalog of the resulting information of the 3D scan. So first of all, we got a point cloud, and the next step was to populate the mesh. And then we recreated or simulated the growth of this lichen, and therefore we made proximity lines and the shortest walk.
Kannst du mal das noch freigeben? Okay. Based on the observation of the lichen section images, we gained knowledge of the distribution, the thickness, and general reaction to external factors of the three main parts we mentioned before. And we then assigned to each of those three parts in the lichen, we assigned one layer of our system to it. And each of these layers or each of these parts performs or adopts to a specific function. With the help of radiation analysis tools, the surface of the synthetic lichen is divided into three classes, which are shown by different sized and colored points. They determine the placement of the algae areas and the protective sun shell. The structure grows from a central point to the surface point, where later algae or sun shell will be placed. It forms the main body of the structure, and its overall appearance is inspired by the branches of fruticose lichens, like the Evernia prunastria. The algae areas are placed on the surface. Their distribution and placement follows the example of real lichen, and only those parts of the surface that are in direct sunlight at midday throughout the whole year are chosen to be populated by algae. Thereby, we can assure that there are sufficient lighting conditions for photosynthesis. We then have the supply pipes and the disposal pipes, and they handle the nutrient and water distribution to and from the algae areas. So we are able to introduce wastewater and rainwater and CO2 to the system and extract the oxygen and the biomass and the cleaned water. The radiation shield is placed on top of the surface and protects especially the algae from too much sunlight and overheating. It is placed on those parts that are in direct sunlight throughout the whole day and therefore would heat up the most. And the support structure of the sun shield, the radiation shield, connects it to the system. And it only passes through the algae layer where there are gaps, so it doesn't interfere with the algae.
Yeah, so now I'm presenting you our final concept. So I think Michael has already explained all those additional layers pretty good. But now I want to summarize this whole project, which we did. And so the final drawing really combines all those additional layers which you have seen before. But what was not shown in the previous drawing was the relation between our module, let's say, or this pavilion and their environment. So because we want to create this pavilion which improves the quality of living in urban areas. Because if you take a look at cities, for example, we have a high CO2 concentration, we have hot summer days, and these two factors leads to a bad air quality. And in addition, we also have to handle a lot of gray water too. And that's where we want to improve this quality of living with our concept. So we take the CO2 and the gray water. So just as additional information on the left-hand side, you can see also the top view and the side view for orientation and also scale. So you can imagine how big the structure could be. So in this case, it's about 5 to 6 meters high. So you can imagine, and we also put some people. So next to it, you can imagine how big this could be. And in this case, we have those CO2 and gray water, and we put it at the bottom of our structure. And from there, with the help of the support structure, which also acts as a nutrient exchange system, we want to put this gray water and the CO2 right next to those algae distribution areas. And there, with the help of this photosynthesis, we can get out those refreshed air, so the O2 and the pre-filtered wastewater, the gray water, and also biomass, of course, which we can turn into biogas or other nutriments, for example. And I think right here you can see it pretty well. Those are the section areas. And in the section areas, you can see that all those support structures are heading right to there, and there the exchange between those support structure where we put the CO2 and the gray water in, and between those algae areas happens. And from the algae areas with the same pipes, we also get the O2 and the improved water out. So with this slide, we want to finish our presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're looking forward to your feedback. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to add on this, the course is a second year design course, and was working on the mutual relationship between microorganisms. So started mainly all the students were starting from the observation of a specific microorganism, and then from there develop a brief and eventually a proposal that should challenge the idea of coexistence. So let's open to comment. I just wanted to underline because we passed from a thesis to a second year, and maybe it was not very clear. Thank you.
Wow, so you say it's second year like studies in bachelor.
Yeah, it's the fourth semester. Yeah.
Wow, that's very impressive. Not only because of the young, in a way, student progress. I anyhow don't believe anymore between the difference between student and researchers. But it's very interesting when you think this further. So first, of course, it's very detailed, very elaborate, very precise, carefully you go through your argument. And I think it's the relevance where this project is like, during postmodernism, you had this kind of strategies which deal with like a Stadtmöbel, like works best with German words, this kind of city furnishing that you pedestrianize in a way like inner cities, and they change from a car-oriented city to a pedestrian or bicycle-oriented city. And the urban design was a lot of played role with, if it's a bench or something. It was actually quite small-scale interventions, which in a way flipped in a way our cities. And you in a way now like lichenize or ecologize, or how to say it, like is a very, when you think it's further, it's a very interesting strategy when you really begin to drop those rocks or what they are within the city, or when you think it's really further, how you really use them for really changing the climatic condition, which is we just now like recently like begin to understand actually this kind of relationship between scales and what like and if it's like tree canopy or like additional shadings on what implication this has down to really like communal levels or up actually. You know? So that's I think is a great contribution when you think this project further. So but when you're now in the second year only, I highly recommend you as a student like really take really this on for further studies, these kind of ideas which you begin here to elaborate. So like it's very nice that it's really like I see it's really beyond even the structure for me. Okay, I'm from urban design, so I can more recommend on that side. But it's very, very thoughtful, very interesting. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
I think my comments would be, firstly, it's a really interesting and original inquiry. There have been many interrogations of living organisms within the environment, and lichen is one of the typically lesser studied of the organisms. So from that perspective, it's great to see this new project. There are a couple of things that I think you need to build out on. I mean, my first question is that obviously you're taking the microscopic and you're scaling it to the macro level. And I think in this, there is a slight danger of biomorphism, and that the fundamental question, although I love the graphic on the screen, I love it aesthetically, and I think systemically what you're doing is interesting. There is a question in my mind as to, you know, quite what the point of sort of scaling this tiny little organism to this massive scale. I don't think that is yet fully answered. I think you've answered some facets of that question, but I think you could go further in doing so. And I think a couple of things you might want to think about. I mean, one of the most significant factors about the behavior of lichen is, of course, the fact it's highly sensitive to pollution. You haven't mentioned that in the presentation, but certainly historically the amount of lichen within and of the environment has been something that has been instantly indicative of the quality of air pollution, of the amount of pesticides and so forth. So I think given that that quality of lichen, you might want to think about that, because that is a more logical, as it were, lens through which you might use the tool. And secondly, I would say the other thing that stands out is one of the extraordinary things about lichen. Obviously, it is in and of itself a symbiotic species, genus, family of species, but it coexists with a range of materials. So, for example, you know, we see lichen living on rocks, we see it living on deadwood, we see it living on on trees. I've even seen lichen populate plastic garden furniture. And so I think maybe if you just if you think about the relevance of the, if you like, the growth potentialities of lichen within the context of the materials that it's actually growing on, that could be interesting. It may be that it takes you up a dead road, but certainly from ocular observations, I've seen very different properties in the way that lichen grows and emerges depending on the surface that it's growing on, and certainly that very much influences the species that it's growing. So overall, really interesting project. I think your graphics are absolutely great. I love the visuals, but I think there are a few more questions that you could dig into that may actually add more gravitas to this and answer that sort of question in my mind of, okay, I like it, but really, you know, why are we scaling lichen to this macro from the micro?
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up with that. I think that the way that I saw this initially was that that you were going to continue with your studies, like you were going to, I don't know, put some toxic chemical in front of the lichen, and then we'll find out that the lichen will make these weird, different types, right? I'm just thinking about the intelligence of, the living versus our, human waste type of thing. But then when you go into this, this is kind of speculative design, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So we have no idea how it works. So right now so when I went into working with engineers and scientists, that's the first thing they basically chopped my head off. They're like, hey, you architects are so loose and fancy free. Like, this isn't real. Why are you doing this? And I was like, well, this is my imagination. I want to make it real. Well, making it real is completely different than imagining and putting a picture, right? So I would say that I love the idea. It's kind of like a wish. You're speculating that this could work. But then I would go, well, what would be the next step? So maybe you can take the speculation and make new forms, like literally fashion, structure. You can make it for yourself. You can live in this jungle gym, put this in your apartment and see how happy you'd be, right? Like, I have no idea. But I think this is where architecture shines. This is where you can come into this and say, I love the pattern. Let's put it on a sports car. Let's wrap it around an airplane. Why can't we put lichens on airplanes? And what if we put it on a space station? What happens? Like, who knows? But I think I like the idea that you got to this step. And there is a danger for sure. But you should articulate anytime you make that jump. I'm making this, it's a speculative design, or it's a speculation. I have not thought this far, but aesthetically it does X, Y, and Z. So, but I'm very appreciative of seems like the rigor, it failed you at the end, but that's fine because you learn from all these experiences.
Yeah, we actually would be now exactly at the step if we further continue or further develop this project. We would now be at the point, I think, where we could start to think about the materials and how we could realize everything. But, yeah, and thank you for the feedback.
But maybe there is an element that it's very. I think it's quite surprising and exciting of what you've done. I think, especially compared to maybe the project before, is that your topic was given as this mutualism. No, it was that was the topic, and I think you kind of went deep enough into your research and analysis of the biological model to kind of discover this quite peculiar, let's say, mutualistic, we may say, relationship between these two organisms that effectively live as symbionts, within the lichen or the lichen. So the kind of algae part and the fungi part, and I think that's obviously the translation of that. You tried to make it beyond the formal element or the biomorphic, because you have tried to organize these different layers in a way that are inspired by the section, let's say, of the microscopic section. I think this is one possibility. I'm not saying it's the most exciting thing, but it's an interesting process. What I like even more is the way you did it, is that you used your drawings as a way of connecting more profoundly, more diagrammatically with the actual relationships between these systems, the systems that you found in these unique organisms. So in a way, for me, what is more, and I think it is what we see as beautiful in these drawings, in my opinion, is not so much the overall shape or the final shape, but is the kind of attempt to use a diagrammatic language of drawing to describe or to sketch how this mutualism may unfold in space, especially where the mutualism is not between one entity and another one, but is when it's a kind of a distributed multiplicity, right? Like in your case. And so in that sense, I think that there is a very beautiful, I think, trajectory you have made. I mean, again, it's not just because you're second years, but obviously you were learning the tools, but at the same time, I think you made use of the tools in a way that is already quite advanced conceptually. And I don't know how much you have, realized that, but surely there is something in your sensibility, design sensibility, that told you, to persevere in that direction, and to, the way the point cloud becomes not just a description of a shape, but essentially an abstraction of these points of sensitivity, these points of activities, a way of somehow capturing, the nature of the organism you were looking at. And again, I think this connects back to what Melissa was suggesting. For example, these organisms are biosensors in a way, like, they are so sensitive to the changes in the environment. And so in a way, your point cloud can become a translation of that concept, where every point indexes kind of molecules in the air and then becomes a node of information in your system. So, I think you have created the scaffolding for a much more sophisticated interpretation of the model you're working with. And again, at the stage where you are, I think this is really exciting, because that means that, step by step, you could begin to exploit all these opportunities and take them much further in future projects.
I wanted to jump in real quick. What Marco said was so profound. Like literally, when my professors gave that little summary, you can already make a diagram, a conceptual framework, a scaffolding where you can take this research to different directions. So please take note of what he said. I think that's really great. And also, if you look at what you've made, there are different ways that you can evolve it aesthetically as an architect, creatively. Like, there is beauty in what you've done. So that's another aesthetic territory to really look at. And when it comes to the idea of systems, there's a whole level of research with that. So I would also look at maybe the edge of science and see if you can come back and capture some of this aesthetics with that. But anyway, I think what Marco said was very clearly good. And just please write it down somewhere and continue.
I'm already on it.
Absolutely amazing comments, guys, and beautiful project. Also, congrats from my side. I hope you bring it back to your next design projects and you evolve it. And I hope you will be back to the Synthetic Landscape Lab and we could work it out together. It has been a great pleasure working with you. So I think we need to move on because we are absolutely late with timing, but it's such a great discussion and the presentations as well. I would just kindly ask everyone to keep maybe the presentations a bit shorter, that we could have a bit more time for the discussion and don't be so late. So I would invite the next students who are presenting, Katharina and Simon. And these are the students of the prototyping master seminar. And here it's a seminar run by Teresa Greskova and Professor Claudia Pasquera. And students were investigating biodigital design and prototyping strategies for the development of biosynthetic prototypes, basically the curtains which are hosting the biosynthetic microorganisms. Teresa, would you like to say a few words about it?
Yes, I would like to thank you, introduce the course, and not to forget that the course was run by me together also with Marco Poletto. And
I'm
no worries.
Second day in a row, I'm getting just confused. I apologize.
No worries, it's okay.
Instead of Marco. Well, they are the same entity.
And just to introduce the prototyping course shortly, we were, as Maria already mentioned, looking at prototyping of photosynthetic membranes. As part of the course, we divided the prototyping aspect at different chapters or different aspects of prototyping. And so you will see one part of the aspect which was mostly focused at, of course, pattern development, but also algae medium inoculation. yesterday we have seen different aspects of prototyping, such as digital simulation, aeration systems, and robotic fabrication applications. But I will already give words to Catherine and Simon to present their work.
Hi, everybody. Catherine and I were in the course prototyping, and we were experimenting with the photosynthetic membranes. It focused especially on the inoculation of the bioalgae with compressor, which could be one step from the prototyping towards the serial production. And to give you a short overview of our researches and experiments, we made a short video.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we see the video.
Yes.
But the sound is off.
Seems we are not hearing the sound. You might need to share your screen again with ticking the little box of sharing the sound.
Prototyping course, Catherine and Simon PEIMPOLD. This research is focused on photosynthetic membranes and their prototyping, specifically on pattern development techniques and on an automated inoculation method, working with a compressor in order to push the biogel filling with pressure into the cushion. Based on a branching algorithm, simulating the growing of branches, and through manipulations of different parameters required for algae biogel photosynthetic performance, multiple patterns were generated in order to result in a possible cushion pattern that could serve as algae photobioreactor. This not only achieves a visually appealing result with control options for density of the pattern, but also increases the algae growth rate with its equal distribution over the cushion. In addition, the pattern is designed to function as individual project, but can also be extended vertically with an option for large-scale application. The photosynthetic membrane is at first explored via two-dimensional drawings, then spatial digital explorations of inflation and solar radiation to deeply examine the growth of flat material into a relief, meaning in a three-dimensional arrangement of algae biogel distribution between the welded lines. Understanding the curtain is vertically suspended or attached to a facade, the algae would have to underlie the rules of gravity, and therefore, the welding pattern and the cushion itself demand a careful investigation of requirements regarding flexibility and stability. In order to prevent large algae agglomerations and at the same time using the entire surface of the curtain, maximizing the amount of algae medium as well as its growth rate and photosynthetic performance, the pattern is divided by regular spacing welds with 5 cm distance in between each, oriented in 45-degree angle, minimizing the gravity effect. Regarding all these aspects, which were optimized throughout numerous experimental procedures of built prototypes including several failures, the final 1 per 1 meter cushion in such evenly distributing welding pattern can host up to 6 liters of algae. Through the demand of increased cushion production and density of the welding pattern, a specific method of biogel inoculation was developed. Therefore, this project is focused on an automated inoculation method, working with a compressor in order to push the biogel filling with pressure into the cushion without manual assistance. The automated filling method makes it possible to turn a prototype process into a large-scale production. The time-consuming process in which the biogel is manually integrated into the curtain is replaced by a machine process with better control options for a certain mass of algae provided for the individual cushions. For this purpose, the pipe attached to the compressor is connected to a particular custom-made distributor, dividing one pipe into 4, allowing the algae biogel to exit the tubing at different areas of the cushion at the same time for the purpose of equal distribution. Following up, new components such as valves are inserted in between the 4 outgoing pipes, in order to create more exits on different heights along each pipe. Both of those elements are being 3D printed. With this method in large-scale applications, one could even imagine several cushions to be inoculated at the same time. Such research allows us to push boundaries of limitations behind photosynthetic membrane production and increase the air purifying systems populating our cities. Assuming that 1 liter of algae absorbs 0.55 kg of CO2 per day, our design with the capacity of hosting 6 liters would have the ability to absorb 3.3 kg of CO2 in 1 day.
Yes, so this was our presentation, and basically throughout the semester we were working digitally, and then we built our prototypes, and we really liked the interaction of the designing the custom digitally and then building a prototype and then learning from it, seeing how it gets filled, and during the process, how we could digitally adapt our pattern to it and then rebuild a new prototype. So it was very interesting to see how our pattern that was at the beginning two-dimensional behaves once it gets filled with biogel. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
I'll just kick off by saying a really strong project. I think your research methodology has clearly been very strong. I felt that, you know, the fact that you had several failures shows that you've been rigorous in your process. I was also impressed at the level of detail in the research methodology and the fact that, you know, you looked at the problem from several different angles. I can see very clear applications for your research project. I think it's answering an important question. It looks to be beautifully executed, and so all in, you know, I really don't have any critique of it. I think it's very coherent and impressive project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe continue, like, of course, like it's a very realistic in a way prototype, or like as you said in the introduction, could easily imagine when you make a business plan with that this really turns into a product. So that's also in the scope of one seminar only. Like it's really great to see this how productive and not only creative and innovative you are, like especially in that time now. I would like to think that further. It's super intriguing, like what you put with this kind of device, which is not only like a sunshade or something which, you know, it's in front of a facade. So you take this for carbon sinking, as I understand. Also, so you talked at the end that you sink there 3 kilograms of CO2 per day in this panel. Now, when you think that, I'm more long-term thinking, 3 kilograms per day, it's 1 ton per year. So how is it with the maintenance? Like, do you, how you take it out? Where you store that further? You know, like around that, actually, there's a whole, always when you think now today about products, you think in a way, the whole distribution of it. There's this embeds or like change whole in a way like economy or like a whole supply chain with that. So and there's like a nice thinking actually that it seems so that for that really that it works on the facade, I need something like a subscription fee. So where like in a way it not only gets maintained in a way it gets harvested. So even I could say when I put this on the facade, it's actually for free because someone's coming and harvesting. And of course, when I sink carbon, like I mean, I get money for it. No? So it's a form of farming and also a form of income. So it would be great to see this actually on low-income housing, because it's in a way like it's another form of support. So like it opens, I think, also a lot of doors when you think that lines further what now like new problems, or not really problems, actually funny side stories of that evolve. So it's really cool to see that.
I think I found kind of particularly interesting the development of this project. I mean, of course, this is built on top of the experiences and experiments which we have developed in the years with Photosynthetica and the other applications. But the challenge that we put to them in a way was twofold. On one side, to think of it as a scalable product, like you said. So in a way, like to try to understand how we can in a way go beyond the craftiness of some of the elements that we had before, like without necessarily losing the qualities, the aesthetic qualities, but also the ability to adapt to different conditions, but at the same time to make it scalable on several levels. Their level was very much focused on this process of inoculation, and in this case, and then of course, like you said, it would be also a harvest. No, the algae, in a way, they are a temporary storage of carbon in the molecule, but then, you know, at some point you can either do something with these molecules, or if they, of course, rot, decompose, it goes back into the soil or into the cycle. So this is a kind of bigger picture that it could be effectively interesting to explore. But what I liked a lot about the experimentation with the inoculation pattern was very much a way in which they became involved with this process that, for me, it's what makes this not just simply a technical or a technological layer, but really potentially a kind of interface between you know, these abstract concepts of, you know, carbon neutrality and all these kind of ideas that are now being recirculated over and over again, and, you know, architecture in a sense of real daily practice of occupation and interaction with the space that surrounds us. So in a sense, I really like their video when there is this kind of a you know, compressor injecting, and then they are, you know, kind of frantically reorganizing it, you know, with their hands, and you know, kind of creating this new distribution, because I think that's, you know, maybe the beginning of what could become a really very interesting suggestions of new practices of cultivation in the urban realm. And so on one side, the whole idea of maintenance becomes you know, redefined as a new urban farming practice, becomes really a kind of daily activities. And I think if the design is developed in that sense, then, you know, it will facilitate that, and will make it more and more a part of a kind of ongoing process, you know, rather than, in a sense, a liability as it is often understood at the moment, like as maintenance, as a kind of cost, right, on the architecture. So I think there is something there that is for me very beautiful. I think again, the video, it's the first time I see this final version. I think it's really beginning to suggest that probably, you know, it would be really nice to be able to see further versions of this video, maybe even more, you know, with even clearer setup and shot in a way that becomes more and more realistic in terms of how it could happen, how it could take place in a space, rather than, let's say, as a kind of one-off fabrication, but, you know, more and more as a kind of daily activity that is embedded in the space of architecture.
I just wanted to follow up real quick. I mean, I guess I can't really add much other than maybe I can ask you, what other possibilities are you looking at applying this type of process? Because you know, here's my thought. I ride motorcycles, right? So I took a 7-hour motorcycle ride in the middle of traffic, and I'm like, oh wow, if I get hit by a semi, wouldn't it be cool if I could just bounce off the road? Would this help? What if actually it absorbed light or something? I'm just making something up. What if it absorbed light during the day, and at night, when I'm riding in the middle of the darkness by the ocean, I light up and I'm not hit by a car, right? So I'm just thinking about, okay, maybe expand my imagination and figure out how to play with the idea a little bit more, and how to find, I would say, different life to it. And I guess I've always been the problem student. Now I'm the problem researcher, that I always dream a little bit further and I just go, wow, this is really taking me to a place where I can speculate, but also look at the practicalities. So it is a successful in that way, but then in the next phase, it would be great for you to speculate in the other way. To really, I say that to all my students, I always say to them, you're the future. And how do I know that you're not the student that's going to change the world if you don't dream that big? So congratulations on your project. I would just say, hey, dream a little bit more, but maybe find your heart in what you think is important. And you can tell, I thought not being run over by a semi in the middle of the night is important, but I would actually really like to incorporate this more in my daily life. So maybe that's another way to think about it.
I just add two things actually that came to me. One of them is the fact that we know that relating to the first presentation that we had in this session, to our emotional response to environments, we know that different colors and different environments have a profound effect on our mental state. We know that our response to green in general, to green environments, is that of calm. It triggers in us, there's lots of research on how walking through a forest or, a park and so forth affects us. And I'm really curious to know how this, I'm picturing this in an apartment or an office block. I'm picturing it hanging as an interface. It's a curtain, it's generating, it's making food, it's converting CO2, but it's also looking amazing. And I'm actually wondering if the cognitive impact of this green curtain of algae is going to be similar at the level of my cognition to that of walking through a forest, of seeing greenery. And it struck me that your first project, if you were to start matchmaking, if you like, seeing what crossover you could have, you could actually interrogate that as a question to see if there's, if you like, an added emotional value to this new, it's not just tackling a problem now, but it's as with Ecologic Studios' wider folio of works. We're actually getting into the business of re-engineering aesthetics and of interrogating this at the level of the heart as well as the head. And my second thought was actually building on what Gustav had to say. I'm wondering here, that absolutely we can't necessarily engineer algae as such to glow in the dark, but I'm wondering, could this basic sort of topology, could this curtain be adapted so that we could put in bioluminescent organisms, marine organisms that are, they react to kinetic impact, and that we therefore know if we shake our curtain a little bit, they're going to glow up. And might there be an application for that other than novelty? There are, if you start to change the organisms in your curtain, they will obviously have different properties. They will enable you to do different things. Obviously, the ocean dinoflagellates are just one species that you could play around with. There are others too. I mean, obviously, various species of fungi and so forth. But I think that it would be interesting if you absolutely start to interrogate this on another level, and I completely agree with what the others had to say.
Okay, thank you so much for the comments. Thank you guys for the presentation. That's beautiful. I think it's another beautiful project of this course. Let's move on. We go to the presentations of the landscape and ecology course, which we are running together with Dr. Marco Paletto and Carminian Enzinger. And we have presentation now of Wiebke and Patrice. Within the seminar, it's a master seminar, and we were developing computational strategies, and we were working in a different scale in order to propose the water system to be implemented in the city of Innsbruck. And we were targeting actually the plaza that we have next to university in order to propose the fountain system that could be built up in the city of Innsbruck. I invite you guys to start the presentation.
Thank you. So The aim of our project is to implement a network of fountains around Innsbruck. Because of that, we named it Biomonitoring a Fountain Network. At the beginning, we focused on two different organisms, moss and old wood. We scanned biomass, moss in combination with wood and old bark. We analyzed the 3D scanned objects mainly based on their surface, color, and in relation to the topic of water. In this following catalog, each object is presented in the same way, so we could compare them easily. And because of the large surface structure and the water analysis of the collected moss, we looked at the object from different angles and choose the most interesting piece for the further manipulation. And as we did not only want to place the generated shape, which we produced by the 3D scan on the site, as it is, we analyzed it in terms of its structure. And first we started to design a fountain which is detached from the site. And we asked which functions should be integrated and how should the basic structure look like. As mosses are supposed to grow on the structure later on, the first target was to create a shaded area, even if the fountain is supposed to be placed in a very sunny location. Therefore, the 3D scan was first given a concave curvature to create a kind of a cavity inside the fountain. To enlarge the surface, again, we imitated the shape of the scanned moss by connecting a horizontal structure and a vertical structure. The vertical structure is thicker or thinner depending on the length of the components. The longer the object, the thicker they will be later on, forming the main structure, which is connected by the remaining components. The vertical structure also provides the water supply for the fountain. The fountain network should cover a sufficiently large area as well as create a connection to the university. And with the selected sites, we have chosen the greatest possible variety of locations which have different conditions of the environment. And in this way, the growth of the mosses at the different locations can later be observed and used as a bioindicator.
For our fountain prototype, we choose a site that is located on one of the main traffic routes into the site. It's also a very sunny location, which experiences almost no natural shading during the day. Since the sun moves from east to west during the day, the concave curvature was increased to efficiently shade the inside of the fountain. We analyzed the site for its topography and observed the interactions of the site with the water and the sun. The most important components for the photosynthesis of the moss. To find out where the rainwater would accumulate most efficiently, we remapped the rainwater flow based on the length of the lines. The longer the lines, the more water would run along the spot and more would accumulate at the spot. So the longer the lines, the bluer they are. At accumulation points, they are visualized by the white dots. The shown network below the fountain connects the connection points with the fountain, symbolize the natural capillary attraction of the fountain in the emerging water cycle. In the following zoom on the fountain, the various long lines, which are marked with their individual lengths, can be seen more clearly. In addition, the shading of the center of the fountain becomes clearer through the adapted design. In the section, the view shows that the fountain is placed slightly elevated at the location, so the water can circulate naturally. The idea of our structure consists of a material that is very porous and has a strong microcapillary effect. In addition, it is mixed with wood particles which form the nutrients for the organisms that grow on it. For example, moss, fungi, and grasses. The porous structure allows the roots to hook and grow, and also the water can be stored in the material. If you would continue the project, we could become a live experiment. At some point, the material might decompose, and a natural habitat for various organisms and species which would emerge. And this was our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So This is a seminar instead for the master. We run this seminar called Landscape Ecology every year, more or less with the same theme, with some variation this year. We started the seminar by mapping mainly the alpine landscape at the territorial scale. And this year we decided to focus on a much smaller type of landscape nearer to the university. So we can open to comment.
I think it's a really interesting project. I saw the larger scale landscape intervention that I think Claudia just referred to, and I very much like the scale of this. The idea of a fountain is something that's very tangible. It's very, I can visualize this actually coming to manifestation. And one thing I'd quite like you to build out on, I mean, I think diagrammatically, this is elegant work, but I think one thing that you could build out on this, you casually mentioned, I think it was mussels, you mentioned a species, and you mentioned that you had to have places of light and shade and so forth. And I'd be really interested to hear more about how you envisage this from the non-human lens, about, not just how we as humans would, if you like, engage with this space, with this intervention, but what other organisms are going to be present, and, how might they augment that space, and why, and what might the outcome of those processes be. So I think for me, that's the unanswered question, but I think overall it's a beautiful and it's a tight concept.
Let me jump in for a second. I actually really like the project, and like is not a good word, I would say. It's really bringing up a lot of ideas, but I think one thing that I would say is what kind of, and maybe I'm going to use a horrible word, style or typology were you looking at creating? Because is this something that's original? Because and I use the word original as in, is it a new species? So when I look at it, it's actually, again, it goes into this realm of art and aesthetics that I feel uncomfortable with, because then my other mind goes, okay, did you meet the objectives of the prompt, like of your of what you set out to do? So in architecture, no one claims that we don't make beautiful things, but then I question the beauty, what is underneath it. So can someone tell me, did you guys meet the prompt of the final result? Did you actually do some analytical drawings of how certain distances are in space? I just wanted to hear your comments real quickly.
Do you mean if we really thought about the scale, or what do you mean exactly?
Yes, exactly. Well, because if you look at, if there's precedents, there are different billionaire parks or multi-million-dollar outdoor exhibition spaces where they would commission you. So literally, if a donor came up to you and said, hey, look, I have $20 million, can you make this for me? So I think you would actually have to give some diagrammatical understanding of how it works, how it would grade, what machinery is required, how would you phase in that type of construction or project. So that's what I'm talking about, like that type of detail.
Yeah, of course, we thought about how it could be constructed, and as we said, if we could work further on it, it would become something like a life experiment, because if we create the structure out of a material which is kind of porous and biodegradable, for example, and then the organisms will take over the whole structure, and by the time it maybe decomposes, we just can't imagine it because we didn't build it, but then it becomes some kind of a natural habitat for insects and birds and other organisms. That's the main thing we thought about.
What about for humans? I think wouldn't it be cool if, you know, if you could stay there for a few hours? Are there any, you know, therapeutic reasons why I would want to be in an environment like that? Have you looked into that?
Yeah,
because that would be the next step, right?
Because as we said before, we choose different sites to create a network of fountains. So this one is like the prototype site we choose to introduce the first fountain of them. And in this case, it is like a little bit difficult to go in and interact as a human with it because it's on a traffic cycle. But in case of the other sites, it would be possible to integrate the people as well. So,
thank you.
Just a very short comment because I have to unfortunately leave soon. I mean, like when I see these, the aesthetic is very strong from that side, and I thought it looks more so as when you talk about the fountain, but you talk also that the fountain usually is on the plaza. So usually it's like hard, straight surface. It's like sits on a rectangle or something. A fountain, like, and I don't see here anything which reminds me anything human. It reminds me more that it's like, because like the aesthetics is very much with 3D clouds. It talks about 3D scanning and so on. That you in a way like you're scanning water. You in a way the fountain itself in a way drives the environment. Also, like when I see the swirls, like it's more so that what you create or what you design is in a way more like an environment for the humidity, no? Or in a way, but it's a thing in blockchain gaming at the moment that when you discuss virtual worlds, so it's clear when I'm choosing my avatar, and one is a dinosaur, one is a cloud, no? Then how they both talk to each other. So we get really a problem that in a way we can choose different words, but what is the communication of that? It's clear that a cloud don't want to just to rain on dinosaur, but also wants to do other things what just the cloud in itself can do. So, and here is like this project, I see it more for in the first in a way visualizing or unfolding what in a way like water in itself with humidity or distribution through space, what kind of environment in itself it is. And is aesthetically from thinking you're completely jumping out from anything in a way, you're going completely beyond the human at first. Right? And this is like just by seeing this imagery is a very poetic step. So I have to leave here. Yeah, thanks for all your work today. It's incredible to see that. This was a very nice day. So thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. It's
nice to see you again, Daniel.
See you soon.
I love your mustache. Sorry, it's gone. New look is the first time I see him like this. Anyway, can I just add something, or we are too much in a hurry?
Let's have the final comment.
No, very, very quickly, because I think I enjoy this project a lot, and I think in a sense it kind of brought to life something that we discussed from the beginning of this seminar. That was the idea to take a typology that is a very ubiquitous and recognizable, like the fountain, and try to use it as an excuse to rediscuss the relationship between water and the urban realm, and the interaction that this system has with the multiple entities. And in that sense, I think the comments were made about people and so on are completely relevant, because that is certainly one of the elements, of the crucial elements. But I think that actually you have addressed this through your drawings, through your description of these water flows and patterns of water, which automatically define, this point of accumulation, gradient, fuzzy boundaries, which, again, it is now just a matter of engaging with these opportunities creatively. So the way this opens up, like they were saying, that we're mentioning before, process of evaporation, transpiration, and all other effects. It's I think it's a very it's just there, to be explored and described. And I think I would encourage you to try to move in this direction when now that you have mastered the language that is of the abstraction. Now try to understand how this language of the abstraction becomes a vehicle for opening up new design solutions that can be actualized, and they don't stay in that realm forever. And of course, here we are also talking about a very unique region where there is a very strong connection with the mountains and with the cycle of water within that realm. So again, I think to kind of open up the discussion in terms of these flow lines you've drawn, where they start, where they end. Maybe they don't start or end within the frame of this drawing. Maybe there are other systems that are involved into this process, right? And that become embedded with qualities and characteristics or minerals or other substances that may be from natural origin, maybe from anthropic origin in the city. And so how all that becomes and meshed with issues that you can discuss and perhaps even tackle through the lens of this work. So again, I think that really, for me, what is important and what we try to achieve with this program, I suppose, was to help you use the diagrammatic realm to in fact engage with the physical and with the actual world from a platform that is more open to interpretation and to multiple actualization. So in that sense, it kind of gives you new entry points. But then, of course, you need to do the next step.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're good with this presentation, and I would like to start the final set of the presentation of another course. And now we will have 4 short presentations of Karina, Marlene, Justus, and Emily. Guys, please get ready. Oh, I see just now that the profile picture of Professor Nilic is showed up here, and maybe we are lucky.
Ciao.
Hello, Neil. Okay, that's great. It's great to see you. Thank you very much for finding time to join us.
My apologies. I've been in a meeting with Gustavo, so yeah.
Gustavo was hanging out with us. Thank you so much for joining. And I was actually just now getting ready to open up a last set of the presentations. We have now 4 small presentations of the Discourse on Landscape course that I had a chance to run together with Professor Claudia Pasquero and with the technical assistance of my colleague Artem Konevskih. And this is the theoretical seminar, and overall narrative of the seminar is questioning the role of AI within the creative process. So basically, we are opening a theoretical question on the topic of synthetic intelligence through the set of experiments with machine learning. And students' projects are presenting the methodology for reading and decoding large sets of text data using machine learning algorithms in order to frame new, individual theoretical statements, as well as translate this text data that they've generated to the visual information in order to set up a new visual language in the architectural drawing. In particular, we were using generative pre-trained transformer, GPT-2, as an instrument of this text knowledge magnification, which helped us to perceive the correlations through the archives of the text data. CLIP was used to connect the text and images, so basically to translate the text data to the image data and help to perceive the features and patterns within our visual experiments. And VQ-GAN, it's a vector quantized generative adversarial network, was introducing the GAN techniques within this process for another level of control and better elaborations of the final results. I think all this will start to be a bit more clear when we start introducing the projects. So I kindly invite first Karina to start the presentation, and Marlene, Justus, and Emily be ready to continue the presentations without the break. And then we have a set of the comments.
Hello, I'm gonna share my screen.
We live in an age where natural and wild structures are being pushed further and further out of our environment. At the same time, we depend on nature with its richness of species and facets, which, while there is nevertheless a far-reaching connection between it and our urban structures. The question now is how these two components relate to each other and to what extent they can be interlinked more efficiently. Nature provides us with air to breathe and food to eat. It's just that we hardly ever take advantage of our local environment for this anymore. Instead, in our globalized world, we're used to the fact that our food often crosses half the globe on its way to our kitchens. At the same time, the past year has shown us how much people long for nature and its fresh air. It's up to us architecture students to shape and improve the architecture of tomorrow. Various studies show that the imitation and integration of biological structures into our urban environment can not only create new forms of habitat, but above all, better ones. Thus, these can act as alternative, more sustainable producers of fresh air, food and energy, but at the same time also as a carrier of information. A new hybrid urban design must emerge, in which artificially arranged biological, natural structures, and not to forget the human life form, not only coexist, but also interact and benefit from each other.
As my introductory video already describes, in the seminar I dealt with the topic of hybrid urbanism, more precisely how the two components, nature and urbanism, relate to each other and to what extent they can be interlinked into a more efficient form of architecture. My first step was then to define and differentiate the terms natural and artificially biological structures. Natural constructions result from an infinite diversity through selection, mutation, and recombination of small multifunctional elements, and therefore aren't separable into the categories material and system. Artificially arranged structures, so-called bionics on the other hand, try to use nature's functional principles for structurally, functionally, and ecologically more efficient solutions. It's not about transferring or copying nature, but about learning from it. In the process of this course, the Institute for Experimental Architecture provided us with various tools using artificial intelligence to create images and videos based on our written research. The results of these tools helped me to abstractly visualize and think about this new kind of hybrid urbanism. What was particularly interesting here for me was that the GIFs and images produced by the given generative adversarial network system, regardless of my research, also delivered the same results. It can be repeatedly observed how biological, natural structures and living beings are being transformed into architectural and urban formations without completely losing their original shape. Since Claudia Pesquero and Marco Poletto already have succeeded in implementing the theoretical requirements for hybrid urbanity within the Biodigital Canopy project and are therefore among my main sources for this work, I would like to end my presentation with a quote from them and a final thought on myself. The convergence of information and biological technologies conjures the possibility of a new industrial revolution that harvests the potential of emergent collective intelligence. I want to add to that there are not only new possibilities to use biological intelligence, but also the urgent need to do so. And in my opinion, in this time, especially this pandemic, it gives us the opportunity to rethink and reimpose. It's the time to change things. And finally, I listed some of my main sources. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the presentation of Marlene.
So hello from my side. Our world is constantly changing and developing, but how can we adjust architecture itself to this change? So associated with this thought, I examined the topic mushrooms and algae as urban planners and how biological organisms are involved in future urban planning. So our cities and buildings expand themselves into infinity of our globalized network with increasing complexity and intangibility, while depending on huge amounts of energy. And as a consequence, the urban area is mainly not able to sustain itself and is dependent on outside sources. However, it is important to realize that the rural area itself is starting to disappear. Quote, from this new perspective, nature appears as disconnected from its picturesque image and becomes hardwired into the complex infrastructures and non-linear digital processes that drive organization in contemporary cities, the so-called urban sphere. And in order to cope with the complexity of our globalized world, biological intelligence has a great impact on the design process of future cities and buildings. As biological organisms, for instance, mushrooms, slime molds, or algae, possess incredible properties. Moreover, these organisms strike the topic of sustainability, biodegradability, and recycling we face in our everyday life. For example, quote, fungal architecture presents a radical vision of architecture that can rapidly, for living beings, grow in situ, providing free material sourcing, unprecedented possibilities in terms of technical, aesthetical, and sustainable solutions. So, since our environment is changing, we have to adjust our approach to urban planning and architecture itself. Therefore, it is inevitably to implement biological intelligence in these professions as they enable the usage of new qualities and strategies. And during my research, I experimented with GAN and VQ GAN codings to highlight various subjects of approaching architecture differently. Fungal architecture, the complexity of future cities, and cities as intelligent superorganisms. And here you can see my references. And to conclude, I would like to show you my final video I was generating. Nowadays, contemporary cities are becoming more and more complex as they function as an ecosystem itself, where the urban and rural area cannot be separated clearly. Future cities
are evolving into an extensive urban sphere where the properties and characteristics of biological organisms can be used for the generation of new cities in order to cope with their upcoming requests. The qualities and attributes of mushrooms, slime mold, or algae, for example, swarm intelligence, self-sustaining energy supply, and furthermore, recycling, biodegradability, and sustainability have a great impact on prospective urban planning, architecture, and design. Therefore, biological organisms could form a trend reversal regarding future cities with increasing complexity and scale, fighting climate change and global warming. A new approach to architecture and urban design.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Justus, we invite you to present next.
Hello, everyone. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, all good.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to present you my work about pattern recognition, the explanation of beauty. I've had this question for years in my head, why we recognize certain things as beautiful. And thanks to this work, I'm getting closer to answer this question. I try to explain beauty by pattern recognition. I want to start with some quotes. This quote shows us very well that we are surrounded by patterns and everything is based on a pattern. Patterns are everywhere in nature. Human beings are hardwired to recognize patterns. Patterns are beautiful to us. If language is the dawn of humanity, math and numbers are the truest sense, the symbolic representation of thought. Math is the symbolic language of patterns and therefore of the universe, the language of God, one might say. This quote is by West Education. Another very short but very strong quote by Plato, the good is the beautiful. I have the same opinion, and this is also a proof for the explanation of pattern recognition. When we see a pattern and we have a good experience with it, when we see it the second time, our brain triggers positive feelings and it is beautiful to us, and the opposite when we make a bad experience with it. Here a definition generated by GPT-2 with a large text input, and I think it's a very good and definition. Pattern is the system that connects whole series of random activities together into a single unified aim. I'll show you some example images about my work. At the top you can see the settings, and at the bottom you can the text I used for generating this image. I don't want to describe the image because I want that everyone makes his own opinion about the image and decides about beauty or not, because everyone makes his own experience. Here an image with the same settings, but with another text input, the language of God. And I want to say also that when we make a connection to architecture or landscape design, we should look more to the nature and to the patterns of the nature that should help us to generate better architecture and landscapes. Now I'm introduce my video.
It's not running yet.
It's going.
You have a little delay. We don't have sound if you have it, and it's very, very stuck. Let's try to share again.
It's not working.
Yeah.
And here are my reference, and I want also say thanks for the support from Maria and Artem. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Justus, for your presentation. Emily, we invite you to present.
So, hi everyone. My topic was aesthetics as a connection between the physical forms of the city and its influence on people. And before I started to deal intensively with aesthetics and its meaning or exact definition, aesthetics for me was always a kind of beauty or the attractiveness of an object or a person. And after my extensive research, now I know that aesthetics is way more complex and includes more than I ever thought. And as a starting point for my own definition, I would take the statement of Mark Foster Cage, who mentioned aesthetic theory, the branch of philosophy most involved with questions of form and its appearance. Aesthetics can also be seen as a kind of perception, especially the distracted perception that is a multisensory habit, like Jordi Vivaldi Piera explains. Important to say here is that the base of aesthetics are our own emotions, and these feelings are by no means only due to the calculation of the heart, but also to the external pathways of the mind, what Gregory Bateson explains. And this helps us also to understand why aesthetics can be seen as a meta-language. It offers us the possibility to develop a more sophisticated and complex level of communication with non-human partners. And aesthetics in this case can be also treated like an adaptive system that continuously adapts to our different changes and to us as well. And while doing the GPT-2 training, there were two more important quotes how aesthetics could be described, alongside the assumption that aesthetics is the fundamental act of existence that allows us to relate our bodies to the world of matter in which we find ourselves. It also describes processes that are just, and the metropolis could be described as such a process through which space itself is formed. And these processes could develop maybe because of the fact that the new aesthetics projects the architectural discourse into the realm of microorganisms. And this offers us that especially buildings are in a constant development and are not finished with the end of the construction. And it is important to say here that we deal with the realm of microorganism because we have strong emotional responses to a living organism, but also to a human modified environment. And so aesthetics is on the one hand, the ability to judge and evaluate physical forms. And on the other hand, it offers us a way to reconsider the value of our work and prevents the reduction of architecture to mere devices. And with these 8 sources, I have written my own definition of aesthetics. And to explain my thoughts on my definition a bit better, I prepared this little video.
Aesthetics is the aspect that deals with the relationship between the physical forms and their influence on the individual and on the whole society. Our perception allows us to understand the link between actual form and value. Accordingly, we can understand how buildings, spaces or objects are reconciled with our ideas of individual and also societal values. It is known that we have strong emotional responses to living organisms and human-modified environment. These feelings are by no means only due to calculation of the heart but also to external pathways of the mind. Aesthetics therefore can also be described as a meta-language that offers us the possibility to communicate with non-human partners. This is important when the new kind of aesthetics projects the architectural discourse into the realm of microorganisms. It achieves that our buildings are not finished with the end of construction. They are in a continuous development, and so they create processes like the metropolis.
Yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much to everyone for presenting the work. I would invite everybody to comment and start the discussion around all the projects, and in order to help you to comment and remember all the work, I will just run now the videos as well at the back of my screen. I will share now.
While Maria shared, before we open to comment, I just would like to underline these are bachelor students. We have 2 seminars in the lab, one with the bachelor and one with the master. We are in general a design lab, very much oriented in design, but we have 2 seminars focused on discussing the definition of synthetic landscape, which are more theoretical, and this is one of those. Thank you. Let's open to comment.
I'll maybe kick off. I thought aesthetically they were really interesting inquiries. I think I'd seen Maria posting some Instagram previews of some of these, and I'd been quite intrigued by what I was seeing. So it was really great to see the presentations. I thought each of them had a very unique aesthetic style. It was really interesting to see the augmented nature of the natural, but through these very human lenses, and the unexpected quality of it through software programming. Yeah, I mean, I thought each of them was really strong, very unique, but particularly the last project we saw, it really conveyed to me that feeling of how natural organisms and phenomena vary from, if you like, how the biotechnological, if you like, and the biofactured varies from the e-tech and the sort of previous generation that we saw of architectures in stasis. It just had this pulsating, this living quality that really, and the sort of the diversity of forms. But I thought all of them were excellent projects.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Maybe I could add something. I mean, this is a really difficult territory, right? Really difficult territory, and this is undergraduate work. So, I don't know. I have a very strange relationship with Mark Foster Gage because I really don't like what he does, but he loves this book Camouflage that I did, which is basically saying that the role of aesthetics is to connect us to the world as a kind of form of sensuous correspondence. Which itself, that book was a response to something I wrote called An Aesthetics of Architecture, which is a critique of the visual domain. And he hates that book, absolutely hates that book. I think it's a more kind of dialectical question than it's not quite so straightforward. And it is extremely, extremely complex. Secondly, on the question of the city, I think there's another way in which you can take that biological metaphor. And I'm at the moment just trying to write something for Acadia, which I'm writing it, but I'm getting some feedback from someone who's worked on a PhD on smart cities, looking at kind of the combination of kind of like a swarm intelligence and also a kind of neuroscientific sort of viewpoint. And there is another way in which you can begin to sort of understand cities as basically and from a sort of cybernetic sort of point of view, as an informational system. It's not just about form, it's about also the kind of behaviors within the systems and how that information is propagated through that system. So there is another way in which you could introduce the human as agent. And to my mind, cities are in any case kind of hybrid entities, not just between the biological and the mineral, but also between that mineral and also the choreographies of agents within the city. And there's a if you want to take the logic of the swarm, you can take it, but you need to engage with how human beings themselves operate. That gets extremely complicated. I mean, really, really complicated. But I think you can make. I mean, I have before in the past made sort of comparisons. I mean, you can see it in the book Emergence, the connections between cities, brains, and software. But there's another level at which you can take that, which goes way beyond Stephen Johnson and takes it into a kind of the domain of cybernetics. And then basically, I think you have to understand the city as a cybernetic system, also in terms of informational processes. But I mean, these things are way beyond what you'd expect to do as an undergraduate. So I would simply say that kind of like you're touching the tip of an iceberg, and it's really, really a complex question. So I mean, it's very beautiful, but I think there's another side which is not about form but informational processes, which is a really challenging aspect of how the city operates as a kind of brain, and you can lock into swarm intelligence as part of that system and see how it's operating intelligently. But it's very hard. It's very difficult, this stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Neil, for your input. That's that's true.
Well, I just wanted to start off briefly. I mean, beautiful images, by the way, and then I go, all right, now Neil, his professorial, I guess, alignment is true. Like, so what is the next step, and how do you interrogate different types of intelligence, both human and natural, right? But then there's logic. Like, what's really great about architecture, which I've really enjoyed, is the imagination and how we put things together. So I was basically, in some of the images, I kept thinking, how does a bird become a city? Is one thing that came to me. And then I was like, it reminds me of archigram a little bit. It's an updated archigram. Or maybe it's a new imagination of a collaborative that's coming up with these new understandings of future world making. Because we not only have to think about the Earth, but we have to think about other planets. So right now, it seems like we can imagine the Earth, but we can also imagine other places. But I wanted to actually thank you, because some of them really, I never thought it through. And I would say that as an imagination exercise, as an exercise for inspiring further research, you all made a lot of progress, and they were very aesthetically pleasing results. But again, with beauty, there also comes with, for me, doubt, and I have to think through what are the next steps you want to follow through.
Well, I do share your doubts, but I'm not suspicious about beauty. So I come somehow from a different perspective, because in a way, I think the challenge, and that we also approach in a quite playful way, being a bachelor or open way, was how visual languages contribute to a theoretical discourse. So what's the relationship between languages and meta-languages in bringing forward a definition of synthetic landscape, or if you like, a theoretical discourse? So that was the challenge. What I see is that what we were trying to understand is also which level of control of the conversation we can have. How can we tune the conversation? And few of the discourse we had, maybe we should work on narrowing down also the visual languages we work with as input, because clearly the theoretical references are selected in a certain number of realms, but can we also narrow down the visual languages so that the correlation is clearer? And we can start to work with pattern as information but also as visual at the same time. No? There was probably a quote from one of the articles we wrote about the slime of Fusarium polycephalum that then got transformed by the algorithm that started from how beauty is an index of ecological intelligence in the behavior of the slime model. You know, aesthetic is directly correlated to the ecological intelligence. So how can this pattern become a way of entailing a discourse? For me, that's what the next bit of this type of exploration could be, that at the moment, as I said, is quite open and playful, but
yeah, also maybe what we were discussing in the morning session is that we are trying to kind of find a way, like we have a gap in the conversation between the biological, algorithmical, maybe and human, let's call it intelligence, but also we have a gap in between the marrying the verbal and the visual. And that's, I think, that's what we are trying to work with in this theoretical statement through the visual. And also, how can we, for example, discuss the synthetic intelligence, by doing an experiment with the machine learning, by rediscovering the process through the kind of its inner way and method. And I think that for myself, it has been a great challenge to develop the methodology. And I was saying this also in the morning. I am very thankful to the students for getting here and like getting into this approach and setting up the method of kind of this drawing, this theoretical drawing or architectural drawing. And I'm very thankful for helping in each this small step that we were developing together.
I was also...
Sorry, but just quickly add, actually, one thing that I thought of after Claudia's comments was the fact that, I mean, within biomimicry and the general sort of area of being inspired by nature, there is this mantra, function over form. So an inverse of the historic relationship with aesthetics. But actually that is, as with so many of the sort of sound bites, it's incorrect in that beauty or aesthetics have shaped evolution. They've shaped nature profoundly. There are, many species of the world, particularly birds, but all sorts of species that have evolved not merely in their color, but literally in the sort of the molecular structure of their, let's say it's a butterfly, their actual being to create that color, to create the aesthetics. So aesthetics are absolutely fundamental to the natural world, to natural processes. And that question hasn't really been explored. It was almost as if we ran away from the question of aesthetics to the form, and I think we do need to re-engage with it and actually looking at those patterns. I guess the questions in my head would be, so we're seeing these forms, these aesthetics evolve in this very organic way. They are responding to the parameters to which they've been programmed. So in that sense, they are just like genetics. But I'm wondering, what's the evolutionary process of that? What's the evolutionary tree of our different aesthetics? Which of these modes of aesthetics is actually going to survive and evolve into other forms, and which is going to go extinct? So I think that you can actually embed a level of depth into this, and I think there is a really important a series of questions to be answered, and they may not be answerable within the BA program itself, but I think that this is an important inquiry, and it is again, I think we've been scared of answering the question of beauty, because beauty has almost become a luxury. Within sort of brutalism and modernism, we stripped everything right back. So this process, if you like, of sort of shedding the sort of what might be perceived as the sort of unnecessary from the architectural aesthetic and the environment more generally, that has very deep roots. But perhaps we should be re-engaging with this, because we know, again, relating to the earlier presentations, we know that beauty is fundamental, that the aesthetics of our landscape are fundamental to our psychological health, but there are also, I think, deeper questions with respect to evolutionary architecture. So I just wanted to throw that in, because I think that there is depth to this seemingly skin deep project. Beauty is more than skin deep.
I just wanted to say briefly, I put 2 references in the chat. One is Richard O. Prum, The Evolution of Beauty. And these books were part of my dissertation at the end because I had to interrogate beauty. And the other is A Beautiful Question, Finding Nature's Deep Design by Frank Wilczek. So he won I think the highest award for physics as a very young researcher. So beauty is completely fundamental. So when I say question beauty, I'm looking at it as a researcher, there's a reason why everything is there. And you have to question every, like for the computer, every pixel, you have to question that color. Why is it there? So that's my comment very quickly, but check those out. They're really great.
Maybe I could just.
There was something that. Oh,
okay. Go ahead.
No, Neil, go.
No, just kind of like, I mean, this is just an undergraduate project thing, and I don't want to make it kind of complex, but, I think there is another side to this, which is really, I mean, this is a kind of PhD topic, just to simply say this, and that is to say that the kind of like, we as architects have the tendency to architecturalize everything. We see things in terms of form. And this is actually quite a problem in many ways, in the sense that if we talk about the rhizome, for example, in Deleuze, he's not talking about literally a form of grass. That maybe illustrates it, but it's about a kind of it's about a kind of informational system. And I think there's a real tendency that whenever we see these concepts that appear elsewhere, like for example, the fold in Deleuze is nothing to do with Maya. It's nothing to do with sexy forms, yet architects always already read it in that way. The same happens with Derrida. The whole discourse about deconstruction is nothing about construction. It's about constructed ways of thinking. But there is this tendency, which is a really powerful but problematic tendency of architects to read things in terms of form. The most obvious example about this comes from the Bartlett. People like, for example, Gilles Retzin sees the word the digital as discrete. Well, the digital is discrete, but it doesn't mean to say you make it into discrete forms. So there's a kind of an architecturalization that's always already in operation in that architectural gaze that needs to be problematized. I just put in there that
okay, I share the point of view, but I think I come from a different point in this sense. It's not about spatializing or formalizing, actually, and it's not unconscious at all. It's quite conscious. It's also part from my PhD and many of the discussion we have, is consciously underlining the relevance of visual language in the current ecological crisis, not necessarily of spatial information or architectural information, but really underline how visual language have been not considered for a long time and need to take a role, a much more central role in the whole ecological discourse. Because they are information that intersect with cognitive system. And as you mentioned your book, and I remember you gave me the book where we talked also about Andy Clark at the time, that was referenced before by another thesis. So it's a question of how visual information can really enter the discourse. Having said that, you said it's a bachelor course, fine. I don't know if and how the theoretical discourse could evolve in this direction, but the point or the game is to underline the role of visual languages, which are not about beautification, but are about information and cognition. They're language on their own that could have a different role than the one they have at the moment in society, both architecturally, but also not simply in terms of form finding, but also in terms of ecological discourse and socio-political discourse. That is really the role that we are trying to discuss here, which is slightly different from the one of some of my colleagues, which are much nearer to the disciplinary boundary of architecture that actually I'm also as background, because I've been trained as an engineer originally. So it's about how information is visual and how this can really be taken seriously on a different level.
Okay, but let me just put the counterpoint to that, and that's to say, I mean, another example from the Bartlett. If you read Mario Carpo's book, The Second Digital Turn, he talks about how there is a style of big data, and that really I really find problematic. Like the style of big data. Let me finish. But the point is that big data is about information, right? And there's no style to big data. It's a different.
I totally agree with you, and I totally disagree with Mario.
That's what I say. And to the point that the kind of, if you're looking for example of what would be the implication of big data in the city, it would be something like the way that Uber operates. You know, you operate with different informational systems, and if you ask the question, is there a style of Uber cars? No, they're the same as ordinary cars.
It's not about a style. It's about visual information, and this is a problem. For example,
yeah, I know, but I think the city also operates at a non-visual level in terms of informational systems, which complicates things. So, you know, a Uber car looks the same as any other car. It's about the way that it operates rather than what it looks like. So it gets very complicated, and I don't want to get into this because it's a kind of PhD topic area, but there is another level at which you can take it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but don't confuse it with all the movement on the discrete, because we are a totally different species in that sense. And I do agree that big data doesn't coincide with a form, but I also believe, and I've been reading that some of the information, like for example, you mentioned Uber, and actually one of the problematic of the way information is transferred in this current digital app is that is linearly logical. So there is no visual information, so many information get lost and are not four-dimensional. So that is a problematic of the current system. Okay, go Marco, because here we are converging.
I think I forgot though. No, but maybe there is another perspective that just for fun, but I was mentioning it this morning, like the idea that maybe we also have a moral duty to educate or to train AI to be a good architect, or maybe to actually learn to engage with issues of beauty. Like in a sense, I'm kind of thinking about the fact that the industry that is deploying AI now extensively in so many levels does it in a very brutal way. Like AI as such, the intelligence of AI is deployed to perform tasks that are often, basically forced labor in a sense. So, for example, I was reading about Alibaba training AI to recognize when pigs begin to show sign of stress. No, so there are these, cameras overlooking millions and millions and millions of pigs in farms across all China. Then images being scanned and analyzed to understand where signs of stress emerge, so that farmers can intervene. So imagine this poor brain scanning images of millions of suffering pigs day after days in this intensive farming. I don't know what kind of AI you get after that. So now I'm kind of kidding, but at the same time, I think it's true that there is an interesting element in terms of how do we begin to engage with intelligent technologies through maybe a method that may be understood as a kind of misuse of the purpose of the technology, of the way the technology was intended to be used originally. But on the other hand, it may actually bring it in a realm where it kind of engenders a much more productive relationship between the artificial and the biological world. So maybe that is also part of what collectively we are doing when we engage with these techniques, even in a very, very intuitive and a kind of speculative way.
Yeah, just to add, I don't disagree with that, but there is another side of the coin. I don't want to go on with this, but I mean, Alibaba. Speaking of Alibaba, one of the projects they have in China is something called City Brain, where they use AI to understand the city as an intelligent system, and then to supplement it in some way to make it more efficient. So, particularly in terms of traffic flows and things. And I think that that's not something aesthetic. It's about the performance of the city, the swarm intelligence of the city, or whatever you might call it, as a cybernetic system. So there's the other side of things. I don't want to get down that line because it's so difficult theoretically. But
because you don't take in consideration the ecological discourse, you just mention performance. But performance for pure performance is not performative. That's what the ecological crisis demonstrates, and that's what Marco was trying to say. If you train algorithm with the same logic that has been created in the ecological crisis for pure target performance, this algorithm will not be performative. That's been.
It's not about performance, though. It's not about performance as such.
It could be the same with robots, no? For example,
it's a rabbit hole. There's a huge area, but I would just simply say that understood in terms of informational systems, that the city is an informational system, a cybernetic system, and that's the other side of things. So I don't want to get into this anymore.
No, I just wanted to say I put some references here because I think I put a lot of references. So I'm like the librarian in my network. So I would say this, a lot of what I hear what Claudia said, for sure. I think it's important to maybe as an undergraduate to maybe disrupt what the order is, because there is an order. And I think when you're young, you can disrupt it and be revolutionary, or I don't know. I think it's important for you to really stretch the limits. So one thing that you should think about is that there is an issue of time here. So when you present it, it's time, it's a visual medium, it's cinematic. You can look at it theoretically through cinema, through photography, but also through vision. So I would look at maybe some studies in the art realm as well. There's a huge territory in conceptual art, photography, and contemporary theory on photography and visual language. Why is that important? And then bring it back to nature. So with the idea of birds have different feathers for a reason. And I think that's what is, for me, so provocative about what I saw. So I'm imagining myself as I'm the person that evolved into that. If that's a strange concept, the power of architecture is the power of the imagination and understanding how everything comes together structurally as well as conceptually. So those are my thoughts.
Wow, I'm honored to get this, like to receive this like a discussion as an outcome of our seminar. I'm just honored to be here and follow up. Thank you so much. That's absolutely inspiring and pushing to continue this methodology further. And yeah, and of course we do question, I think, like we have this discussion in mind and we keep forward. Should we close on that? Claudia?
Yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks, Neil, Melissa, Gustavo, that are still with us. Congratulations to all the students and the faculty. And if some of the guests have some final remarks, the one that have seen also the other project, but also Neil, I don't mind, or suggestion on the way forward, feel free to.
I mean, maybe just very briefly, I think it's really great that these things have been addressed. And frankly, I mean, some of the things in the last session that I've just seen have been theoretically very challenging and really quite difficult, and really interesting that you're doing that undergraduate level. I think that I would always be aware of to problematize. I think problematization is asking questions is the important thing, and the role of theory is not to be a kind of manifesto, but to challenge the way that we think. So I would just encourage you to continually ask questions the whole time, and that's how discourse gets stronger, by there's feedback and questioning and challenging and so on. And I think that it's not at all easy at all, any of these subjects at all, absolutely not. But maybe when tomorrow I'll finish my article on the brain cities, about the city as a brain, and I think it's really interesting in terms of how you can maybe connect this with an alternative way of thinking about how the city operates as a system, an informational system. But no, I just want to say I'm very impressed by this. I've always been very impressed by the energy that Claudia and Marco put into these things. I mean, it's really it's wonderful work. So, but don't think it's easy. Don't think it's easy. You can take it to another level. Thank you, Maria, as well.
I never think it's easy.
Thank you very much, Neil, for your feedback.
Thank you.
It's amazing that we catch you.
Yeah.
Let me follow up with Neil. It's going to be hard to follow up with Neil, but I'll try. I would say that I put a book that really changed the way that I think about graduate school, being an architect and being I would say a cultural changer. So Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life and Play and Possibility by James P. Carse really was a simple reduction of what we're here to do as architects. What are we here to do? We're here not only to make a living, but we're also here to make change. There's short-term change and long-term change. AI, it seems like it's going to be here for the long term, but where are we on the short term? What questions are we asking about the technology? So when Marco actually said, oh, by the way, are we, by what we put to the AI, we're really training it and we're training ourselves along the way, just thinking through the exercise. So I would encourage everyone, especially doing these undergraduate investigations of beauty, what are you investigating? What are you pushing? And remember, you're here to push and to make us feel uncomfortable and to feel joy and love. That is very important for humanity. So think about that. But I thank you for your thoughts, and I added more books as well.
Thank you. Please save the chat.
Let me just put one more into the chat. This is someone unbelievably smart and really, really smart, who's been working on smart cities, but from a kind of cybernetic point of view. And anyway, that's something else you might like to at some point look at. Shima Beiji, really smart.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess.
Sorry, I lost the connection for last second.
Melissa, do you have a final remarks? But I think you've been with us the whole day.
Oh, unmute. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm unmuted. Yeah, I mean, I thought a really impressive suite of projects. I thought that for the main part, they were very coherent in that they were joining a lot of different dots and navigating the information very well. I thought the general standard of the diagrams and the aesthetics was very high. And I think that the problem that the synthetic lab faces is one that in effect we're all facing, and that is the fact that we're going across boundaries that have not in effect been crossed. We're trying to navigate these silos, and it's difficult in a technical sense, but it's also difficult theoretically and practically. But I felt that generally speaking, all of these projects were doing that in a very interesting and a compelling way. And that, you know, the standard of works is very high, and where there are challenges, it is simply, it's not a lack of ambition in the projects, it's simply because, you know, and this is building on what Neil was saying, these are incredibly complex and they're incredibly difficult tasks, and so they are things that are going to really push us, and that we're not necessarily going to be able to reconcile immediately. And I think that the character that was showed, the research process that was in the algae curtains project, wherein it took several failures, it took several projects that, you know, prototypes in effect that didn't work to get to the one that did. It's an invariable part of any project that you do in this space that there's going to be a lot more failure than there is success. But I was generally very impressed by, you know, all of the projects, but in very different ways.
Thank you. So we hope to see you again soon. I will stop the live now, and maybe the faculty and the student can stay around and we can have a further internal conversation. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.